All right, welcome back to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the city of angels, or city of demons, La La Land, or Hollywood, or as I've asked for your opinion of what to call Los Angeles, I've heard dead. Well, I'm still taking any of your opinions, so whatever you want to call it, let me know and we'll include it in the show. Now, today is a very important guest for multiple reasons. One, I wanted to talk to him for quite some time. Two, all of you, especially who I see in chat right now, have absolutely heard his name via Preston Dennett when we were talking about terrifying alien abduction experiences and much, much more. And let me just say this too. I mean, we'll get the rest out of the guest's background. Notice how I haven't said his name yet. See, I even gave it away by saying it's a he. He
No,
is also a JD and also retired in the United States Air Force. With that being said, let me introduce the one and only Mr. or Dr. Terry Lovelace. Dr. T, welcome to the show.
Doctor, thank you for that warm welcome and that
Uh,
great introduction. It's
it's
my privilege to be here.
It's our honor. That's absolutely true. And I'm sure some people are going to be scared by the end of the show, but at the same time, we have to tell this story. So let's go back to what happened. When did you first get introduced to the ET phenomenon or alien phenomenon, abduction phenomenon, UFOs? Did you even believe years ago before anything happened to you that we were being visited?
I knew. I knew from a young age. I'll tell you, crazy thing. When I was 4, 5, all the way through age 7, I would have these little monkeys visit my room.
Ooh.
Monkeys, monkeys, like little circus monkeys.
It's like almost a screen memory, as if they're trying to come into your room with something that's not so scary.
Yeah, yeah. And the one closest to the head of my bed would always ask me to go with them. And I would scream bloody murder, and my folks would come in, and it would be a big deal. I'd wake up everybody in the household. Of course, no one ever believed me. Um, and then when I was age 8, I was in my backyard, and I'm playing with a bow and arrow, an adult bow and arrow set, and I'm living in urban St. Louis City, and I'm firing these arrows into this bale of hay. I don't know who lets an 8-year-old play with this, but my folks sure did. And I'm loading an arrow into the notch of the bowstring, and I'm looking down, and across my feet, I see this elliptical shadow move. And I looked straight up, and directly over my head was this big, beautiful flying saucer, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. And I looked up, and I thought, my God, that is so, so cool. And it was sexy was in my dialogue. Sexy wasn't in my vocabulary at the time, but in retrospect, it was sexy in the way like a new sports car is sexy. It was just really cool, and it was probably about 50 feet over my head, maybe 30 feet in diameter, and it would wobble a little bit in the breeze. Crystal clear day. And what was so unique about this is I'm in a city where there's dogs and cats and kids and cars and noise and horn honking. And as I looked up, I immediately had there was this immediate auditory change, like I had put both my hands over my ears, this muffled sound. And as I look up at this thing, I remember thinking, you know what? If I laid down on my back and looked up, I could get a better view of it. Now, that makes no sense whatsoever, but that's what I did. In retrospect, years later, I think what happened was that's what I told myself. I think what they did was they just dumped me on the grass when they were done with me. In my mind's eye, this was just a couple minutes, maybe a minute experience before the thing shot off. But who knows? And
Now,
then,
let me say one thing. You said you used to scream for your parents, right? Scream bloody murder. I've heard several cases, though, even people try to scream, but they won't allow them to because they're frozen in bed, they're paralyzed because of what the telepathic abilities they have.
And I don't know of the memories that I have. I think there's an awful lot that I don't remember or am not allowed to remember. So I'm sure that could have been the case. But
that's a very good point. There's only one person I know that has total conscious recall, and that's Jim Sparks. For the most part, they don't want you to know you've been taken until something happens that triggers the memory, or years later, maybe you go through hypnosis, or something reveals itself to you.
Yes, this was years later. Years later, I had a revelation. For all of my adult lifetime, the bulk of my adult lifetime, all that I could recall was seeing a UFO in my backyard, and that was and ending up on the ground for some reason, and that was pretty much the extent of it.
Can you describe what the craft looked like? Was it like this typical dome? You said flying saucer, so maybe like sports model Bob Lazar type, or TR-3B triangle, or what? What do you say?
It was perfectly round, and as a kid, I was eager. I was putting together model airplanes all the time, so I had a little bit of knowledge about mechanical things and about how they worked. So, I'm not a dumb kid. I'm looking up at it. I'm thinking, first of all, I'm looking for markings, either USAF or CCCP at the time.
Yeah, the Soviet Union, right? Yeah, CCCP.
Yeah, and I'm looking for seams. I'm looking for rivets. I'm looking for some type of propulsion mechanism. And I see nothing. I see this flat, highly polished aluminum-like surface on the bottom that I might mention is not absolutely perfect. There's little bit, tiny dents and little bits of imperfections in it. And like I said, the thing seemed to wobble just a little bit, like it were unsteady in the breeze. Now, when it shot off, it kind of listed to one side. And then it did so to clear the electrical lines. And when it shot off, it went from like 0 to 500 miles an hour, I don't know, in a split second.
So no sonic boom, and I'm assuming silent when it was just hovering too, right?
Absolutely silent.
Wow.
And like I said, I was in this weird auditory state. And everything came back to life as soon as the thing shot off. Then I'm back in this reality of cars and dogs and cats and, kids
model
playing.
Planes, yeah, of course. You're back to being a kid. You're back to being human.
Yes. But what I don't understand is this was urban St. Louis City, 1963. Dozens of people should have seen this thing, and I'm screaming. I'm hysterical. And my mother comes out. Of course, she thinks I shot a neighbor in the head with an arrow. And my mother comes running out, and she's like, what are you doing? What are you screaming about? Stop this. And I'm like, Mom, did you see it? It was so cool. Did you see it? And she's like, what are you talking about? And it's like, it was a flying saucer. And she said, oh, you did not see a flying saucer. I don't know what you saw, but you did not see a flying saucer. You saw a jet is what you saw. And that started an argument. And, at age 8, I couldn't understand. I was a pretty straight kid. I didn't lie. I didn't make up stories. And I could not understand why my parents would not believe me. But nobody would. But I learned something, because 3 years later, I saw another one in the middle of the night outside my bedroom window. And I didn't call for anybody.
Now, at what point, so this happens when you were a child, and I'm assuming you joined the Air Force after high school?
Yes. Immediately after high school, I joined in 1973 with the idea of getting the GI Bill to go to college.
And law school, of course.
And law school then later, absolutely. It's crazy. There's an interesting point here, and that is that I was so shaken up. I think I was juvenile PTSD, shaken up by my sighting of this flying saucer and I was having nightmares. And my folks took me to a medical doctor, or, the family doctor, right? And the doctor, looks me over and he's pressing on my stomach. And I'm pretty savvy. I know there's no real medical examination going on here. And my dad's outside, and he says, "So tell me, son. Dad says you've seen spaceships outside. Tell me about these spaceships you saw." And I said, "Nah, I only saw one. It was a flying saucer." And he says, "I see." And he calls my dad back in, and he says, "All right, what kind of TV is this kid watching?" And like my dad would know, he's like, "Oh, tell him what kind of TV you watching." And I said, "I don't know. I watch Space Ghost." And they stopped me there, and he says, "Well, what we have here is a case of overimagination, aggravated by the influence of Space Ghost. You got to change his television routine." Well, so I had my choice: the Three Stooges or Perry Mason.
I would have chose Three Stooges over Perry Mason.
I did, but I'll tell you, after 4 weeks of Three Stooges, Moe, Larry, and Curly was about on everyone's last nerve. So
yeah, I don't blame that. Yeah,
they switched me to Perry Mason, and that's when I decided, hey, this looks like a fun job. I think I want to practice law. And by God, I did, and I loved it.
You must had a different experience than I did in law school, because I realized I did not like it one bit. Obviously, if you're doing trials or trial advocacy, that's much better than saying sitting in an office working at a large firm, 80 and 90 hours a week, never going to court, things like that.
No. Yeah, no, you know what I did was I went to work for a small law firm, and we did anything that walked in the door, DUIs, divorces, anything. No pressure. Me and an older guy who was kind of a mentor. And yeah, he dumped a load of work on me. But I liked going to court, and I had a good experience with that. But I think that's because I had a good mentor, and I had a good trial experience. And I know a lot of people who did not have that same experience. So I'm very fortunate.
Now, how old were you so 1973, you finished high school, I'm assuming 17, 18?
Yes, 18. Joined the Air Force at 18. And event that...
Let me ask you this, because in your bio, it says 6 years. I know we're going to get to the camping trip, but 6 years in the USAF, right? So I'm assuming you went to Officer Candidate School, too?
Oh, no. I spent 6 years as an enlisted man.
Oh.
I was a medic. I was trained as an EMT and a medic, a combat medic. But I worked as an emergency medical technician in the emergency room at Whiteman Air Force Base, which was a SAC base back then with B-52s and ICBMs. And today, Whiteman Air Force Base houses the B-2 stealth bombers.
Well, yeah, that was the time when they were really clandestine, I would think. This is the time when they were testing the stealth bombers at Area 51.
Yeah, in Area 51, yeah. When I was at Whiteman, they had a contingent of B-52s armed with nuclear weapons, and then accompanying KC-135 tankers to help them get over the North Pole and back, and a contingent of 60-foot-long ICBM Minutemen II missiles called MIR for multi-reentry vehicles. Each rocket held, it was either 3 or 5 independently targetable nuclear weapons.
Kind of like the Saturn V's, but meant for devastation, right?
Yeah, the Saturn, yeah, exactly.
Now, you were about to say, in 73, was it, or 76 was it, that you went on a camping trip?
Yes, actually, it was in spring. I should set this so this makes sense, and that is that I had a good buddy, a good friend. I refer to him in the book as Tobias because of his family. I don't use his real name, and I can get into that later too. But we were the only 2 guys in the squadron that chose to work the night shift, and I did it because I was taking evening classes, trying to knock out an undergrad degree so I could go to law school. And he was taking some physics classes, and this kid just lived to watch the night sky, and he knew the constellations. He knew when a satellite was going to cross over. He was a brilliant kid.
Now, this is the time when we didn't have thousands, or at least over 1,000 satellites, whatever it is now, right?
No, just a few. But he knew when they would come over. He was a mathematical genius. He really was. And I always wondered, in retrospect, how did he acquire this love of the night sky and this fascination with space? And I think that, it's a pity we never talked about it, but I think he was visited by the same people that I was visited by. I don't think the two of us were out there by happenstance. We were paired up there. Like we were set up or something. I don't know.
From the hires up, maybe the chain of command. You think?
I don't know. I don't think the chain of command in the Air Force, but I'll tell you, nothing would surprise me. Nothing would surprise me.
So now, what was the big change that happened when you and your the other person that you were with?
Well, the big change, I probably should tell the story for it to make sense.
Yes.
And that is, why don't I tell about the camping trip? Because I think that's what everyone needs to hear and probably wants to hear. Because that was the most epic event in my life, the most horrific, the most terrifying, and certainly the one that's haunted my dreams for 40 years. And that happened at one night shift. We're working, and my buddy says, "Hey, I got an idea, man. Let's go camping." And I'm laughing. I'm like, "Camping, man? What do you know about camping?" He was a city kid from Flint, Michigan. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. Neither one of us were Boy Scouts. Neither one of us had ever been camping in our lives. And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean go camping? I don't know what are you talking about?" And he says, "Well, look, you're an amateur photographer," and I was. Photography was my hobby. I had a little dark room set up to develop black and white film, and I had a nice Yashica camera with a set of lenses. But when you live on a nuclear base, there's very little you can do with a camera.
Yeah. So
you got to get off the base. And his idea was to drive 6 hours plus south to Devil's Den State Park and go camping. And I'm like, I don't want to stay at a campsite. It's like sitting in Walmart's parking lot. You got people next to you. You got children. You got other undesirables running around. And I mean, where's the adventure in that? And he's like, no, man, you misunderstood me. I mean, let's be outdoorsmen here. Let's dodge the campsite and let's go into the park and find a piece of high ground, and we'll set up camp in the wilderness.
Oh, high ground, so you could look at the sky, stars, huh?
No light pollution. I'd have a chance to photograph some eagles, hopefully, and at least, at worst, some nice scenery. So that was our plan. And one June day, we drove down there, cleared it with our wives, had the time off. We drove down. We dodged the park rangers, didn't get a camping permit, and we drove this back road until it degraded into, from pavement to gravel to dirt, and there was a chain across the road and a sign, absolutely no admittance, and it was part of a nature preserve or something. No hunting, no hiking, no admittance whatsoever. And there was a chain across the road, but it was just looped over on itself and locked. So when I pulled up to it, I thought, "Oh man, we're stuck here." And my buddy's like, No, man. And he hops out of the car, goes over, and just lifts up the chain because it's just looped on itself, drops it, and we drove right in. And he had the forethought. He grabbed a piece of paper out of the glove box and a little pencil, and he made a map as we were driving, and that would prove invaluable later because there were no landmarks, and we had no map. So, Even when we drove in the ambulance, I always drove the ambulance and he always navigated because he had an unerring sense of direction. And he guided us to this piece of high ground, and it was the highest point we could find. And at the top of this piece of high ground, as we drove up on it, there was like a horseshoe shape, and it was a meadow. And it was just gorgeous. And at the open end of the horseshoe, there were some big boulders, and then a drop off that went down to some water. And it was cool. I mean, it was really cool. It was just a beautiful place. And I told my buddy, I said, let's park right dead in the center. So we got this big open meadow all around us. And he's like, no. Let's park over here on the tree line. And I didn't understand why he was so adamant about that, but it would make sense a little while later. And usually when we argued about something like this, he would cave, but he didn't. He's like, no, man, no. We have got to park over on this tree line. So I got tired of fighting with him. I'm like, whatever, dude, let's just park and set up our camp. So we pulled over and we parked, and he wanted to set up camp right away. And of course, he was more, he was more adult than I was. I'm like, I just drove 6 hours. I want to stretch my legs. Let's go out for a hike. So a lot of little things happened, but to cut to the chase, it ended up that we got right back to the campsite as the sun was setting. So we had to scamper. I mean, we had to just bust ass to get a campsite set up. And we finally did. And we had barbecued some hot dogs and stuff. And we're kicked back on these air mattresses. And we're talking. And we're just chatting and laughing and just having a good time. And I remember telling him, saying to my friend, I said, man, this must be the allure of camping. This must be why people do this stuff. Because this is pretty nice. This is pleasant. And he has to gloat and said, yeah, man, I told you, this is nice, isn't it? And it's about this time there's like a lull in our conversation. And this sounds so cliche, but I swear to God that this is true. This is true. During this lull in our conversation, I noticed that the tree frogs and the crickets and all the noise in the forest had been so loud earlier, I guess cicadas too, that we could hardly talk. We could hardly hear one another. And now it's dead silent. And not only is it dead silent, but even the breeze that we'd enjoyed just an hour earlier had dropped off, and it's just dead still. And I'm looking at it wigged me out. It weirded me out. And I'm looking in back of our tent to this tree, and I'm watching this tree with the flickering campfire, and I'm thinking, if I look at this leaf has to move. It's got it. It can't stay still forever. And the whole time I'm watching it, it doesn't move. And I had the thought then that am I looking at a holograph? Am I looking at something's not right here? And I asked my friend, I said, hey man, it's really still out here. Is this normal? Is this the way it's supposed to be when you camp? And he's like, oh yeah, we've been laughing and cutting up. Just wait, they'll be back. All the crickets and stuff, that'll all come back when we quiet down a little bit. And but I wasn't comfortable. And we picked up some conversation again, and it was a short while later, maybe 30 minutes. He turns his head to the left, and he asked me, he says, hey, Terry, were those over there before? And I'm like, those what, man? What are you talking about? And he's pointing to his left, and I lean back, and I'm looking over his left shoulder, and on the horizon, there sat 3 tiny stars in a tight triangle. I say tiny because they weren't big like aircraft landing lights. They were just maybe a little bit brighter than a North Star. Mm-hmm. They weren't as bright as Venus, but they were in a tight triangle. And what was curious was they were too far above the horizon to have been lights from a parking lot or
Uh-oh, Terry, did we lose you? Hold on a second here. Mr. Lovelace. Dr.
I'm here.
There you are, yeah. You
I'm
just cut off for a quick second. You were talking about the
I'm here.
horizon, and they were too high to be parking lights or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah, we're talking about trying to figure out what these things are. I mean, we know aircraft, we know everything that's in the air, and these weren't aircraft lights. And while we're looking at this thing, they moved and they rotated like they were on an axis, and they did about a 3/4 turn. And we got real excited, and we're like, "Wow!" And we thought this was really something unique. We didn't know what we were looking at, but we knew what we were looking at was something special. And it was at that time that, right at this time, two things happened. That is that the three stars, they started to go up into the sky. And the second thing was I felt this wave of calm wash over me. And that I didn't understand. And it was all of the nervousness, all of the anxiety that I felt earlier with the forest falling quiet, all of that was gone. And I wasn't nervous anymore. And there was very little conversation between us. And these things started to climb up into the sky. And it was clear from the onset that these weren't three independently, perfectly choreographed lights. This was one solid object.
So these were lights, the tips of a triangle, maybe?
Yes, it was definitely a triangle. It was a triangle because it maintained that perfect triangular shape. The 3 points of light, they expanded, but they always stayed equidistant to one another. So it was clear, number one, it was a triangle, and number two, it was getting bigger, which meant it was
coming closer. Yeah.
Close to us.
Scary, yeah. I would think, at that point. You being with your friend at a high point, not near the campground, I wouldn't know what the hell I would do personally if I was in that position.
Well, that's the paradox here, is that we should have been absolutely out of our wits, and we weren't. We were kind of disinterested, almost, we had this benign, almost apathy, and it was inappropriate. It wasn't an emotion we should have been experiencing at all. And this thing got bigger and bigger and bigger, and as it approached the campsite, it was a beautiful night. It was crystal clear, and there were 1 trillion stars in the sky, and we could actually see, this thing was so big that we could actually see its shadow creep across, because we could see down below, we could see it creep across the terrain as it moved in our direction.
Now, let me ask you a question. You're familiar with the Phoenix lights in
Yep.
1997, right? And the length of it, the width of it, right? They say about a mile.
No, the thing that we saw, I'm glad you brought up Phoenix lights, because that's another commonality, is that it blocked out the stars.
Wow.
As it moved past these fields of stars, they'd block out and then blink back on again when the thing had passed. And as for size, the thing was big, but it was in no way on the scale of the Phoenix lights. I guesstimated it to be a city block in length on each side of the triangle. The depth of the thing we wouldn't be able to see until later, but we would get to see it.
And the inside, I would think, too?
And the inside. I've got memories of the inside. And we watched it creep across the thing, creep across the map. And this is where I just wonder why my buddy, then I knew why my buddy was so intent that we camped off to the side, because had we camped in the middle of this meadow, we'd have been directly underneath the center of the thing. And this thing came to a dead stop at about, I'd guess, 2,500 to 3,000 feet over our heads. And all we can see is the bottom at this point. So we have no idea about depth. And we're both watching it, and I'm like, Tobe, man, should we be scared? And he pauses and he says, no, man, I'm not scared. Are you scared? And I'm like, no. And it was just surreal. And he had a flashlight, and he's playing with this flashlight. And I mean, it's like typical horror movie, he's shining it at this thing. And right from dead center and underneath of this triangle, which all we can see is a matte black with lights on the apex of each one of the points. Underneath, from dead center, there came a beam of light that just came on like someone flipped a switch. And it was a beam of visible light. It was like a searchlight cutting through fog. It was a visible beam of white light. And it landed right square in the center of our campfire, which was just about embers by now anyway. And we're still not freaked out. We're still sedated. And we're just looking at it. And no conversation. And this thing is there for maybe a minute, probably less. And it turns off, and then immediately, in its stead, there came a second light from the same point. And this one was a pencil-thin beam of what looked like a laser light. Now, in 1977, lasers were a fairly new concept. And I wasn't real familiar with them.
Especially those pen lasers, right?
Yeah, it was just like a pen laser, only purplish, and the beam of light was the diameter of a pencil.
Wow.
But this beam of light, it came and it hit the campsite, and then it would turn off and then immediately turn on somewhere else, and then turn off for a millisecond and then land somewhere else. So it gave this illusion that this purple light was dancing all over the campsite. And I remember thinking, damn, this thing is scanning us. And it hit me in my chest. I know it hit my buddy in the head and the chest. I never felt a thing. It scanned my car, our tent, our campsite. And that went on for probably a good 3 minutes. And then just like the other light went out, this light goes off. Again, it's just like someone flipped a switch. So we're laying there. And I remember thinking, Toby was wrong that the crickets and the tree frogs never did come back. And he spoke up and startled me. And he says, show's over. And he got up and just grabbed his air mattress and went into the tent. And this thing is still 2,500 feet over our heads. And I grabbed my air mattress and I followed him. And after he it's a small tent. After he got in and fell on top of his mattress, I shoved my air mattress in, and I didn't bother to take off my boots or anything. I didn't undress at all, which would be interesting because later that would be significant. But I threw my air mattress in. I fell down on top of it, and I just thought, I wonder what happened to the crickets and the tree frogs.
Shit. I would wonder too, yeah.
And I was out.
Was it, you think that minute that you saw it was actually what you just perceived, but was actually a lot longer?
I don't know. You know what? I'm inclined not to think so, but I've got no way to tell. Because I think what they were doing, first of all, I think they were scanning us. And I don't know the difference between this searchlight beam and the laser beam. They were two separate things. I'm sure they had two separate purposes. But they were preparing to take us, is what they were doing. I was out as soon as I hit that inflatable yellow, air mattress. And I don't know how long I was out. In retrospect, it was around 3 hours. We both wore mechanical watches, which in 1977 was about all that you could get. And I had an Elgin wind-up watch, and it was stopped at 240. I wish I'd kept it because it was a fairly new watch, and both of us as EMTs, we needed watches to do our job. And neither one of our watches, both of our watches were broken the next day when we were trying to sort out what had happened to us. But I was out, and then what happened was sometime later, which I think was about a passage of about 4 hours, I got woke up by these lights. And there's these yellow, white, and greenish lights. And they're flashing at odd intervals through the canvas of our tent. And man, they're bright. I mean, they lit up the inside of this tent like a ball stadium. I mean, it was like crazy. And I'm not with it. I'm out of it. And I'm thinking, well, where am I? Oh yeah, we're camping. Yeah. And I'm thinking, these lights, what the hell are these lights? And I'm thinking, you know what, must be a park ranger's truck. Yeah, I bet this is these are overhead flashers of a park ranger's truck. And I could hear this droning sound. And it's a mechanical sound. If you've ever stood next to a big piece of industrial machinery, it's not so much loud, but it's powerful. You can feel it. Yes.
Like a crane or something like that, right?
A crane, a diesel locomotive, yeah, something really powerful. You could feel it in your chest more so than it was loud. And I thought, well, look, the park ranger running a generator in the back of a truck, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I tried to get to my knees. And in the middle of these flashes of light, I look over at my friend, and Toby's African-American, and he's got these tear tracks down his cheek. And in these flashes of light, I can see him really clearly, accentuated against his skin. And that shocked me. And that scared me. And then all of that calm, all of that sedation that we felt earlier, all that shit's gone. I mean, I am absolutely terrified. And I can't imagine what on earth would move this man to tears. And I get to my knees, and I'm still a little bit woozy, and I'm like, Toby, man, what is it? Is it park rangers? And he's like, shh, and he holds his hands up across his lips in a universal gesture to be quiet. And he says, they're still walking around out there. And I'm like, who, Toby? Who's still walking around out there? And I use my left shoulder and I nudge him to the left and I pull back my flap of the tent. And I look outside and two things immediately are very clear. This giant triangle that had been 25 feet over our heads some hours earlier had now descended and is now just 30 feet over the floor of the meadow. And it's an amazing thing to see. It was this gigantic triangular thing. It looked like an office building suspended in air. I would estimate that this thing was 5 stories in depth. It was huge, absolutely huge.
I couldn't imagine the power that something like that size would take just to be elevated above us, let alone fly.
Yeah. I can't imagine how many tons this thing must have weighed, or maybe it weighed nothing. I don't know, But I'm looking out at the meadow, and I see these kids. And I'm like, Toby, what the hell are these kids doing out here? And he said, man, those ain't no little kids, Terry. He says, don't you remember? They took us and they hurt us.
Ooh.
And then he loses it, and he's leaning on my shoulder. I put my arm around him, and he's sobbing. And I'm watching outside, and these little guys, first of all, they had an unusual gait. And I describe it as they walked like they had sore feet. They had a strange gait. And on what I first took to be children, on a second look, it was pretty obvious. These were not human beings. They had heads that were large, limbs and a torso that were disproportionate. They all appeared to be absolutely identical and probably 4 feet or less in height, and very slender. And they're all paired up in 2s and 3s. And from the center of the triangle, there came this column of white light. It had that same character as that softball diameter size light that landed in our campfire. But you could see it was a visible light. And these guys, these little guys, in pairs of 2s and 3s, would just kind of wander around and stumble into this light. And once in this light, they dissolved. And we watched them until the last 2 dissolved. And then as soon as they were gone, that light turned off. And there were lights on the apex of each point, like I'd said earlier. And there was what I called a light bar. Because this thing was so tall, there was a light bar that stretched from the very bottom to the very top. And it had a light, piercing white light. When the light turned off below, the colors on the ends of the triangle changed to all white. And there was an intense beam of white light that would run up and down this light bar. And I remember thinking back then, I thought at the time, that's what gives it the illusion of a twinkling star when it's in the sky. And that droning sound had stopped. And my friend's hyperventilating. And I'm like, Toby, man, you got to get a hold of your breathing. You got to get a hold of your breathing. And we're just talking above a whisper because we were terrified. We don't know if any of these guys are still out there or not. We don't know what happened to us at this point. We know this. We know we're all hurt. We know we're hurt. We're hurt badly. I know that my shoes, my boots, my combat boots were unlaced, and my socks were on sideways, something I would never in a million years do. And Toby had the same problem. We had to take off our boots and socks and put them on properly. And we're just trying to be absolutely as quiet as possible. And we're watching this thing, and it takes off. And when I say it takes off, it doesn't shoot off, like a rocket. It lifts off about like a hot air balloon would. And it just lifts off straight up and makes a turn and continues straight up in the air. And the higher it goes, the faster it goes. And we watched it until it was just a single point of light and then gone. And I think we sat in this tent for probably half an hour, listening to ourselves breathe, afraid to say anything or do anything. And this sounds crazy, but I did not want to leave that tent. That layer of canvas, well, it didn't give me protection, it gave me cover,
Yeah. And a sense of cover, a sense of safety, even though there's really nothing you could do, I would think.
Yeah. So it was my friend who said, man, we got to get out of here. And he says, and I'm like, how the hell are we going to find our way out of here? It's pitch black outside. And he said, well, I made that map on the back of a banknote still in the car. And we had a barely operable flashlight. He said, if the flashlight will stay operable, I can read this and you drive and I'll navigate you out of here. And that was a routine we'd done 100 times, driving an ambulance. He would, like I say, he would guide and I would drive. So that wasn't anything new to us. But the difficult part was getting out of the tent and dashing to the car, getting inside, closing the doors, locking them. And I remember him asking me, are we good? And I knew what he meant. Is there anything else in the car with us here? And I turned on the overheads and we looked under the seats. We looked everywhere. He's like, no, we're good. And I asked him, I said, man, look around. Is there anything at all to drink? I am just so damn thirsty. I'd never been so thirsty in my life. We were both acutely dehydrated. And He's like, no, man, there's nothing. And so he guided me out of there. And that was a crazy ride. But with his sense of direction, he got me back to Blacktop Road, and we headed back toward the airbase. And we were glad to get to Blacktop, I'll tell you. And we drove, and Toby's like, man, please stop the first place you can find that's open and get us something to drink. Now, 1977, this Lake of the Ozarks area was not built up at all. Now it is. I mean, now, there's a big resort down there. There's condominiums and places. But back then, it was all soybean fields or cornfields. There wasn't anything there. So I drove for probably an hour and a half and it's dawn. And I found a little place called like Gas and Go or something, a place for the locals to fill up with gas and buy ice. And I pulled in there. And my friend had curled up in a fetal position on the bench seat next to me. And I was hurt, but I think whatever they did to me, they gave him a double dose because he was hurt pretty bad. And we pulled into the gas station, and I woke him up. I said, hey, Tobe, we can get something to drink here, man. And I ran to John and got into the men's room and just started drinking. I mean, I had this grungy, dirty faucet, this flickering neon light. I'm just drinking handful after handful of water, as much as I can hold because I'm so dehydrated. And that's when I looked in the mirror and I couldn't believe my eyes were almost swollen shut.
Ooh.
And my skin, I had this terrible, terrible sunburn. And I'm looking, I never took my shirt off. I'm looking, I got sunburn on my chest. Then I realized I got sunburn everywhere. I mean, everywhere. And,
that reminds me of the Cash Landrum incident where the two ladies and the grandson of one of them were literally had radiation burns.
We didn't have hair loss, but we were close to that, I bet. Now, I know when we got back to the hospital that, I heard the growl of the Geiger counter, but, and it was everything I could do to get us home, I'll tell you. We must have looked like train wrecks. I walked in to pay for the gas, and there was this old guy behind the counter, and he was like straight out of a farm magazine. He's got the overalls and the John Deere hat on.
Yeah, I could picture that.
Oh yeah, I fill up the car, I pull out a 5, and bought a 6-pack of orange soda, and about that time my buddy Toby comes stumbling in, and he buys Grape Aid, and his eyes are swollen shut, and he's stumbling around, and this old guy takes off his glasses, and he looks us up and down, and it's just classic. He says, now it ain't none of my business, but what the hell you fellers been into? I said, I don't know. And he said, well, you better get yourself someplace where you can get yourself some help. And I was kind of touched by him caring, to be honest with you. I thought it was very kind.
And the irony of this is that in other incidents, you would be the help. You were a medic. So yes, he's telling you that it's now the medic's time to get, looked out.
We were the medics in need of help. Yeah, we were that. And he says, you want to use my phone and call somebody? Hell, I don't care. Go ahead and use it. And, I could you see that phone call, picking it up, call my wife. Yeah, hi, hon, we're on our way home. Yeah, we're coming back early. Yeah, we got abducted by a giant spaceship, and we're on our way back. The phone's 2 feet from him, I could see him swallowing his chewing tobacco. And so we just thanked him for his kindness and piled back in the car. And, man, the light was just killing me, just killing my eyes. And we drove back. We got back to base. We both lived in NCO housing. And I dropped Toby off at his house, and then I drove over to mine.
Non-commissioned officer, is that what NCO means?
Correct.
Okay.
correct. And dropped him off, and then I went to my house, and I walked in the door, and my wife was like, "Oh, nice to see you." And she's like, "Oh, what happened to you?" And she took my temperature at 104 fever.
Wow.
And she gave me 3 aspirin, and
I
I
was going to
chewed them
say
up.
that's near fatal, 104. I mean, your brain's really cooking at that point.
For an adult, that's dangerous. Damn dangerous.
Yes.
I'm lucky I didn't seize her. So she gave me 3 aspirin to chew, and she drew me a bath of cold water, and got my temperature down to 102, and then took me to the hospital. And here's the deal. You know, we both worked in the hospital, and these people here were our friends. We knew everybody. So my wife took us to the hospital. We knew the docs. We knew the nurses. And the doctor's like, well, you know, what happened to you boys? And I told him, you know, I wasn't going to tell him, well, we saw a spaceship. I sure as hell wasn't going to tell him that, because I knew if I told him that, we'd end up on a psychiatric ward. So I told him we went to bed, and we got up sick as dogs, and we drove home, which, you know, satisfied my desire to tell the truth. And that's what happened. And they were stymied by what was, but something had happened, and they knew we were ordered to have no contact with one another, and they separated us. I think what happened in retrospect, I think they're park rangers, because when we left our tent, we left our cooler, we left Toby's backpack there with all his information in it.
You just got the hell out of there.
Oh, God, yeah. We got to the car and got the hell out of there. We didn't care what we left there. And these park rangers must have found our little campsite the next morning, found Toby's backpack with his address in it, called the air base and said, you had a couple, you know, airmen out here in a restricted area. We don't know what they were doing, but they left their campsite, so they must be intended on coming back. Well, the injuries that we had were so much like radiation burns that got the hospital commander notified the Office of Special Investigation. Now, the OSI, the OSI is to the Air Force what NCIS is to the Navy, if that makes sense.
I've interviewed Richard Doty, and yeah, he told me that they're also their own entity, even though they're part of Air Force. They don't answer directly to Air Force. They have their own colonel and you know, things that other people on chain of command.
They're a rogue agency, or at least they were in 1977. I can tell you they were absolutely a rogue agency. And I knew that I was hurt pretty bad because they gave us both private rooms. And like I mentioned, we were ordered to have no contact with one another, and I didn't understand that. And I was we were admitted acutely ill, dehydration. And my third day, the evening before, I was in the hospital for 3 days, and the night before I was going to go home, my nurse came in to give me an injection. And when she opened the door and came in, these 2 guys in blue suits followed her. Now, I could tell these guys were cops. I mean, you know, these guys were just, they were cops. And the one
reason
guy,
I'm guessing they separated you to get different stories so you wouldn't collude with each other, right?
That's my guess. Yeah, that's my guess. And what these 2 LSI agents did was they tried to intimidate us. And boy, I'll tell you, they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. This guy, you know, and there was a major, a guy maybe in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, who was a major with maybe 160 pounds, wiry kind of guy, wore a flat top haircut like they used to wear back in the day, and kind of like, you know, sauntered around and had the jacket open so you could see the shoulder holster with the revolver in it. And they walked in, and the nurse, the major says to the nurse, he pulls out his ID, he says, if that's going to sedate Sergeant Lovelace, it's going to have to wait. We need to ask him a couple questions while his head's clear. And the nurse hesitates And then he says to her, and shut the door on your way out. And I thought, harsh. And she did. She left in a huff and shut the door on her way out. And these two guys immediately, there was a captain, a younger guy, maybe late 20s, and I had a mechanical bed. You know, it wasn't electric like they are today. And the captain gets at the foot of my bed and cranks up my head so I'm sitting bolt upright. And they pull chairs around next to the head of my bed, one on either side of me. They swooped everything off my tray table and slid it underneath me. And he hit the overhead lights. Now, they had kept the overhead lights off because my eyes were so badly burned. I had the kind of injury you get when you look at an arc weld. That's the kind of burn I had. I had burns to my eyes. And I said, sir, could you please turn that light out? It hurts. And he said, gotta see what we're doing here, son. Can't work in the dark now, can we?
Huh.
And I thought, oh boy, here we go. And I'm terrified. I'm thinking, oh my God, what the hell? Do we burn down this forest? What did we do? And this guy says, son, I want you to explain something to me. He says, the Rangers found your little campsite. And he says, you left all your stuff there. He says, you know what I think? I think you left all your shit there because you were going to come back. And that tells me that you boys were doing something out there you probably shouldn't have been doing. You were in a restricted area. And did you know that was federal land? And he kind of made a big deal of that. And actually, it wasn't federal land. It was a state park. I don't know the jurisdiction of it. But, you know, I wasn't a lawyer at the time. I didn't. It scared me. That's all I knew. And he said, you know what I think? He said, I think you boys probably got your little marijuana plot out there. Is that true? That's what's going on here? And that really stunned me because in 1977, that would have been a ticket to Leavenworth.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, especially in those states. Yeah. It's still Schedule 1, even though more than half the states have medical or recreational marijuana.
Yeah, yeah. So that frightened me. And this guy interrogated me, and I'll save you the details of the interrogation, but it was pretty intense. And I go through the dialogue pretty well in my book. But at the end, this nurse came back. And she's like, Dr. Sanders wants Sergeant Lovelace to have his injection now. Should I bring Dr. Sanders down here? And this major kind of chuckled and said, no, we're about done with Sergeant Lovelace here. And he started packing up their stuff. And I should mention, they laid out 6 forms for me to sign. And I asked him, I said, what are these? And the major said, well, these are consent forms. And you know, you're a lawyer, you know the drill. These are consent forms. They give us your permission to see if you have anything. You don't have anything you want to hide from us, do you, son? You know, you don't have big bags of marijuana in your house now, do you? You wouldn't mind if we took a look, would you? You know the drill, you know.
And it's the way they phrase it, right? It's not like, can we look in your house? It's, you don't mind if we do look in your house.
That's right.
Yeah.
They phrase it in such a way that you feel that if you voice an objection, you're going to sound like you're guilty of something.
That's right.
So I signed everything. And I'll tell you the truth, my eyes were so swollen that I couldn't have read it anyway. I signed 6 documents, never read a word of it. And it's the last time I did that. I mean, I read my washing machine warranty now. You know, every word of it.
Yeah.
And this guy, they packed up their stuff. I got my injection. The captain leaves. The nurse leaves. She shuts the door behind her. It's just me and this major. And this major bends down, and he gets right next to my ear. And he says, son, I know, and you know, you two knuckleheads stumbled onto something out there. And I think you know what I mean, don't you? And I said, no, sir. He says, oh, yeah, you do. You know what I mean. He said, all I want to know is, how many pictures of it did you take?
Oh, shit. So they knew what you saw, legitimately.
They knew. Absolutely, they knew. And their concern was, I had this reputation as being the photographer in the squadron, so they were sure that I had taken pictures of this thing. And Nothing was further. Damn, I wish I had. I wish I had taken 100 pictures of the thing.
But in the
But
moment, you're not thinking that.
no, no. I left my camera at home. We had Toby's camera in his bag. Never crossed our minds to use it. But we were, I think these things, whatever they are, can control our emotions and control our intentions and our perceptions and control us. And that's what was going on.
Well, that's one huge common theme about them controlling us. I've heard from particularly one person, Dan Burrish, when he worked on J-Rod, whether you believe the story or not, he said the mechanism that they use biologically to shut us down is flooding our brains with natural opiates, or natural opiates that our brains produce. That way they can put us in a state that they can control us.
I think that's I never heard that before, but I bet that's right. I bet it's a natural dopamine or something, because I definitely had that sedated. It was a kind of a pleasurable feeling, where I should have been absolutely in stark terror, running in the forest to hide someplace. I was kicked back on an air mattress, watching this UFO the size of a medical building hover over my head, and that makes no sense.
Now, at what point did you recall, on that incident, do you recall seeing the beings?
I'll tell you what I recall. What happened was about 8 weeks later, the OSI called me for an interrogation. One of the forms that I had signed was for a hypnotic regression with chemical enhancement, or words to that effect.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. And I talked to several people. As a matter of fact, at Contact in the Desert, this 70-some-year-old man walks up to me, and we're outside, and it's a big crowd, walks up to me and says, "Sergeant Lovelace," and he shook my hand, and he says, "I know the man who hypnotized you." And he turned around and walked away, and I'm like, "Wait!" And he blends into the crowd, and I can't catch up with the 75-year-old man. It's like he disappeared. I couldn't find him. But that's the truth. But yeah, 8 weeks later, they called me down to OSI headquarters. Actually, they sent a car for me, and they took me to OSI headquarters. And this guy, they picked me up at like 9 a.m. in the morning. It's a 10-minute ride, and a driver. We went through double-locked security doors with a buzz, click, you go through, and this security policeman took me down this narrow hallway, and there were interrogation rooms on either side, and they were marked like A, B, C, D. I think I was in room D. And he opened the door, and I walked in, and he said, "Someone will be with you shortly." And he shut the door, and it went click. And I look around, and I'm in this room, just about the size. I mean, I got a pretty big bathroom, about the size of a big bathroom or a small bedroom. And there's a gray military steel desk in the center of the room with a padded gray chair, 1950s vintage. And there were, in each corner, there were three of these fiberglass molded chairs that were ubiquitous back in the 60s. They were kind of like sloped. You used to see them in doctor's offices and stuff. They were all over the place, and they came in different colors, yellow and green, and yellow being the most common. And then there's a mirror on the side of the wall, only it's a framed mirror with wood. It's about 2 foot in diameter. And I'm thinking, that's got to be a two-way mirror, because, who the hell is going to be grooming themselves in an interrogation room? And I pull up this comfortable chair, and there's a General Electric clock hanging over the doorway. And I'm sitting in this great padded chair, and I'm watching the clock, and it's 9:30, and it's 10, and it's 10:30, and it's 11, and it's almost noon. And I think the wait was on purpose. It was intentional. It was part of the intimidation process. To make you anxious and wear you down. And in walk the two agents that interrogated me in the hospital. And they ignore me, other than the major kicks me out of the comfortable chair and commandeers it for himself. And the two are talking, and I sitting in one of these fiberglass chairs, and the major says, "You know, you're going to be hypnotized today." Kind of like offhand, and I'm like, "What?" And he said, "Sir, I understand, but I don't understand why. I don't understand why." And the veins stood out in his neck. And this guy turned beet red, and he pulled out a manila folder. He took out a piece of paper, and he slammed it on the desk in front of me, and he says, "Is that not your signature, son?"
Oh, one of the 6 documents.
One of the 6 documents. And he says, "That's all the why I need." And I'm like, "Sir, I'm scared. I don't know if I should talk to someone." You know, I didn't have the benefit of a law degree. I'm 22 years old, dumb, and I'm, trying to make my way in the world. And he says, "Well, you want to withdraw your consent? You can do that. Sure, I can tear these papers up. You want me to do that for you? I'll just tear these papers up and we'll see you at the court-martial. How about that? That all right with you?" And that scared me worse than anything, the idea, those words, court-martial. And I'm like, "No, sir, no, I want to cooperate. I'll cooperate any way I can." And about that time, there's a knock at the door, and there's this major that enters. Big, barrel-chested guy, sandy hair, but no name tag, very unusual. Wearing the gold oak leaves. And he walks in, and he knows these 2 agents. And they're chatting like, "Yeah, how's it going? How you doing?" They're talking about golf or fishing or something, I don't know. But they obviously knew one another. And he kicks the major, the OSI agent, out of the chair and commandeers the comfy padded chair on rollers and sits in it, rolls over, and then turns his attention to me. And he holds out his hand, and he says, "Sergeant Lovelace, I'm Major Brownfield. It's so nice to meet you finally." And he shakes my hand. And I'm thinking, man, this guy's more like a therapist or a priest than a military officer. And he says to me, he says, "Sergeant Lovelace, for purposes of today's little exercise, would you call me Brad? That is my name." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Don't you mean yes, Brad?" And I said, "Yes, Brad." And he said, "And Sergeant Lovelace, for purposes of today's little exercise, may I call you Terry? That is your name." And I said, "Sure. Yes, sir. Or yes, Brad, you may." And then he starts this little bit of chit-chat. And he knew I was from St. Louis, Missouri. And he rattles off some landmarks in St. Louis, and we're chatting. And I'm actually starting to get comfortable with the guy. And then I'm thinking, you know what, I'm just not that damn interesting, And I think he perceived that. And he shifted gears. And he abruptly looks at me and says, "Terry, do you trust me?" And I thought, like hell, But I lied and gave the courteous, albeit untruthful answer. And I said, "Sure, Brad, I trust you." And he says, "That's good. That's very good that you trust me." He says, "You know what? If there's anything you want to talk about that you want to change in your statement, we can do it now. We can fix it. And I can ask these 2 agents to step outside, and you and I could have a little chat. What do you say?" And I can't overstate how creepy this guy was. And I said, "Sir, I've already told the agents everything that's the truth. Well, minus the 6-story tall UFO, but everything else was true." And, then he took this little shaving kit because he knew we weren't going to get anywhere. Mm-hmm. And took this little shaving kit and he opened it up, took a little towel out, and he had a syringe with some yellow liquid in it, which I found out later was sodium amytal.
Oh, I was going to guess sodium pentothal. What's the difference?
Just a molecule or so's difference, but that was the drug of preference in the 70s. And
so this was the truth serum, right?
It is. It is. And the major said, you're going to be hypnotized today. And I said, yes, sir, I know, but the medicine, I don't know. Now, I got to tell you, at this point, I had taken 2 years of psychology classes. My undergraduate degree is in psychology. And I knew a little bit about hypnosis, and I knew that I couldn't be hypnotized against my will. I knew that I could resist the hypnosis, but I had no idea about the medication. So what I decided to do was to hypnotize somebody. What they did was this. They took me through this progressive relaxation. He took me through this progressive relaxation thing where he asked me again if I trust him, and I said, yeah. And he says, okay, Terry. He says, you're standing at the top of a stairwell, and we're going to go downstairs in the basement and turn on a light and take a look around. Now, with every step you take, you're feeling relaxed. Take that first step, feeling relaxed. Take that second step, feeling twice as relaxed. Take the third, feeling 10 times relaxed. Relax your legs, relax your arms. That kind of drill. And this guy had a voice like a radio announcer. It was smooth. It was easy to listen to. And in my mind's eye, while he's walking me down the stairs, I'm going the opposite way. I'm going up the stairs,
You don't want to go down that hypnot
no, I didn't want any part of going
yeah.
down there. And he asked me, he says, I want you to relax. And what I'm trying to do is trying to covertly as possible tense my muscles instead of relaxing them. And I think I did a pretty good job of resisting as much as I could. But when he gave me the medication, it was like, bam. It was like, it was very pleasant. It was a heavy sedation. And one of the first things he asked me when I'm under hypnosis, well, what he did was he said, we're at the bottom of the stairs now. He says, I want you to reach up and turn on that light so we can look around and we can see things. And I thought, my arm should move, but it didn't. And he repeated it again and said, reach up and pull that chain and turn on the light. So I very intentionally reached up, but it was of my own volition. I reached up and made a motion like I was, jerking a chain. Yeah, I was jerking its chain, all right. And made this motion like I was turning on a light. And then I placed my hand back in my lap. I felt out of it, but I didn't feel like I was under his control, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
And I tried to be as cooperative as I could, but I tried to keep a separate part of my brain operable where I was running multiplication tables, I was reciting Beatle lyrics, I was doing everything I can not to surrender my full mind to his control. But his first question was, he says, you and Toby went on a little camping trip. My, that must have been an adventure. And I said, yes, Brad. And he said, and you saw some funny lights in the sky, didn't you? And I said, yes, we did. And he says, and who were they, Terry? Because he knew. And I said, they were the space people, Brad. And I thought, what the hell? Did that come out of my mouth? And I was genuinely shocked. I was genuinely shocked that I said that.
It's the sodium mannitol going straight to your
Absolutely.
subconscious and pouring it out. Your memory, your suppressed memory.
Yes. And what he did then for the next 4 hours was question me. And I have memories today that I wouldn't have but for that little exercise where he pulled those memories out. And, my buddy lost his mind. I could interject here and tell about the last time I saw him, or I could save that for later. Let me save that for later and finish the interrogation, because there's some things that I remember that I think everyone's going to want to hear, and that is what was the inside of the spaceship like.
Oh, yes. And I always argue that the best way for any of us to really know what the insides of the craft look like, what the beings look like, what they smell look like, how they interact with each other, are by talking to the people who have been taken or have contact, either on purpose or like again, you against your will.
Yes. Yes. And I've gotten, like I had mentioned, I got so many letters from people who had very, very, very similar experience with very similar beings. And Brad, one of the questions he asked me was, he says, now there came a time when they took you on board the ship, didn't they, Terry? And I said, yes, Brad. And he says, I want you to look around. I want you to tell me what you see. Don't tell me what you think. Look around. Just tell me what you see. And what I saw was incredible, because this spaceship appeared to be, as I said earlier, a city block in length on all three sides and 5 stories deep. This thing that I was inside of was the size of a football stadium. It was 10 times bigger on the inside than it was on the outside. Now, I don't understand how the law of physics works, but it was outside of my level of comprehension.
You know, I've heard that multiple times where it looks small, but yet when you go inside, it's far more massive than it looked from the outside. And you're right, I couldn't explain it. I mean, does that have anything to do with gravity, the bending light to disguise the true shape? But that's a very, very huge anomaly that I can't comprehend. And so are so many other things associated with these ETs.
Yeah, and it was absolutely overwhelming. And some of what I remember is the basis of what became my nightmares, and I think that's why I remember them, because they haunted my sleep for 40 years. And I recall that I was standing next to Toby, and we were nude, and I could only move my eyes. I was frozen, and I had my clothes in my hands, and I've heard this from other people. They were
Well, this
frozen.
also actually sounds like the Allagash guys, the Allagash 4. They were nude, frozen. All they could move to were their eyes.
That's all. That's all I could use. That's all I could do was move my eyes. And I remembered hearing a woman screaming. And what was so disturbing was, you startle somebody and they scream. Somebody gets excited and they scream. But there's a different kind of scream when someone's in pain, when someone's being hurt. And that's what I heard. I heard somebody in great pain. And then I heard there was a passage of time, and then I know Toby was gone. And I heard him say, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, no." And then that's all I heard. And I'm scanning my eyes all around. And there were some other human beings in there. There were 2 other sets of human beings in there. There were these guys that there were, I think, 5 men and 1 woman. The woman was, they were all about our age, about, late teens, early 20s. The girl was short, Latino, and then the other guys were just standard. They were military. They wore military haircuts. They had combat boots on. They had on these tan flight suits with orange insignias. And they wouldn't look at us. And I'm 99% sure these guys were members of the crew. And I say that because one of them went over to a panel on the wall and was doing something to the panel on the wall. And I'm sorry, bear with me 1 second.
Oh, no
I gotta
problem.
take a
You're human. You have, a pet. A lot. Most people do that are listening, and it's not uncommon for a guest to have a dog bark in the background. So don't worry about it.
Okay, I'm back and we're good. So I'm looking around, and these guys were crew members, and they were human beings. Now, I never heard them speak. So I don't know. Maybe they could have been reptilians in disguise for all I know. But man, I got a vibe from them that they were human, and they were members of the crew, and they knew we were captives. And to my right, there were, off segregated from us, were a number of people. And somewhere between 20 and 50 people. There were a lot of people. And there were men, women, and children. And they were all holding their clothes just like we were. They were frozen. And I could see, if I strained my eyes all the way to the right, that they're crying too. They got tears running down their, every one of them. And their eyes are going crazy, darting all over the place, looking, trying to make sense of where they're at. And this thing we were in is so massive. There are these little ubiquitous gray guys all over the place.
Ooh.
And I have a theory about them. I don't think those are living sentient beings. I think those are some type of biological
glorified robots is what I've heard them be called, right?
Yeah, that's what I would say. I'd say they're robots of some kind.
Especially since they have no sex organs either, right?
Yeah, you know what? I'm not sure if they wore clothes or if that's just the way they're molded, but they were everywhere, you know? They were all over the place. So they were walking around, but they were walking around with purpose. And I could see out of the corner of my eye to the left, a taller being that was not a gray guy, that was 6 foot tall, that was clearly in charge, clearly in control of things. And, you know, you can tell when somebody carries themselves with that air of authority. And I'm straining my eyes as far to the left as I can, and just by happenstance, this thing turns its head to the right, and we locked eyes. And in the millisecond that we locked eyes, this guy was in my head. And
telepathically.
Doctor, I got to tell you, this thing knew me. He knew my wife. He knew my secrets. He knew my ambitions, my fears, my parents, my everything. He knew me. And, you know, it was the most frightening thing I've ever experienced. And what I got reflected back from those eyes was just raw intellect, just intelligence. That's all.
Now,
and
when you said this taller being, was he also gray?
No, he was not.
Was he human looking, or?
He was kind of a pale pinkish, 6 foot tall, wearing a V-necked garment of some kind. And as I said, clearly in control of things. And
Welcome to Bank of America Claim.
Uh-oh.
Clearly in control of things, but scary as hell. And that's one of my common nightmares, is having this thing in my head, reliving that experience. I noticed a couple things about the structure of this thing, and that was how brightly lit it was inside. It was incredibly bright, and that's why my eyes were hurt. Our eyes were hurt so badly because this thing was so bright on the inside. And everything was either white or chrome or no, not chrome, stainless steel, white or stainless steel. The room where they took me, that's the other common memory that I have that Brad was kind enough to drag up from my subconscious, was being in this examination room. And it was a domed room with an examination table. And I remember thinking that it was porcelain. And I don't know how, but they turned, I was like a plank. I mean, they turned my body sideways, parallel with the ground, and I'm up on this table, which I was expecting to be cold, but it was warm. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I know why it's warm. It's warm because there's been, you know, a parade of 40 other human beings lying here probably tonight. And they did something to me. There was this is when I ran into the insectoid thing. And I've got an interesting view on this too. There was a 7 foot tall praying mantis looking thing with a giant triangular shaped head. And I know in my mind's eye, for some reason, I picture him in a lab coat, but I don't think he was in a lab coat. And they were doing something. They did something to my chest that hurt, and they were doing something to my lower back that hurt like hell. And I'm screaming, and I'm filling my lungs up with as much air as I can, and I'm screaming, and I can't hear anything. And this insectoid thing takes a step toward the head of the gurney that I'm on, and turns this big ugly face down toward me. And telepathically, I heard crystal clear in my head, "Why are you screaming? You know we don't harm you. You know we take you back. Stop screaming." And then I was out like a light.
Through the, without even touching you, right? Just by telepathically.
He'd not. Well, he spoke to me telepathically, but after he said, you know, "Why do you scream? You know we know you take you back. Stop screaming." And he tapped me on the head, and I left that part out. He did touch me on the head.
Very interesting. You know what? I was just on a show. I was actually listening to someone else who was also being taken. Actually, one of the people here listening right now in the chat room, he was the co-host of this show. It's Cassidy. He goes by the username Lion, and he said the person that they were interviewing, was, I think it was Tony Alcala, something like that. He basically said that where he was touched was the area of his third eye, in the middle of his forehead. Was that the same for you?
Forehead. Absolutely. Middle of my forehead.
Wow.
And pop, with this green appendage. Yeah.
Now.
So I got to tell you that I want to interject this because I think it's important. For years I harbored a lot of animosity toward these things. And I used to fantasize about, going in there and then, shooting the place up or something. Because they hurt me, and they gave me 40 years of nightmares and changed my life in so many ways. But this big bug thing, I almost got the impression, and I don't know, maybe this is Stockholm Syndrome or something, I don't know, but that if we were to sit down and have a conversation, I think it would say, no hard feelings, man, just doing my job. I didn't get malice from him. What I got from him was he's doing a job, yeah, he's hurting me like hell, but, that's just a side consequence of the procedure. But yeah, I don't know if it was maliciousness. When we tag an animal in the Serengeti, we hurt the thing. We terrorize the animal. And then we trust that it'll forget about it and move on with its life, and then we'll gain knowledge and information from that. And, I just regret that I could not sit down and have a conversation with these guys. And I think about that guy that I caught the gaze, the guy that was 6 foot tall, and he had the black eyes that wrap around, only they weren't the real big exaggerated black eyes. They were just about the size of sunglasses, they're wrapped around the side of his head. But yeah, I get the impression that, maybe they weren't all that malicious, because they sure as hell could have killed us. One of the things that's also been a worry to me over the years is those other 20 people, what happened to those people? Where did they go? They kicked us out. We landed, they kicked us out of this thing, and we landed, I was barely conscious, by my car. And I remember thinking, somebody screwed up, we should be in the tent. And sure enough, there's these grays, and those little things are strong as hell. They really are. They're wrestling us, and they take us and they drag us into the tent.
You know, that's
And
actually really weird because you would think because of the size and their weight and their skinniness, they wouldn't have as much, strength. But yet, you're describing that they do.
they did. They did. I was surprised that they had such strength, and I'm surprised that they weren't smarter than that. You know, that's what made me think they were robots. I mean, they weren't. They didn't get it right. They didn't put us back in the tent. They dumped us by the car, and then we had to be moved.
Do you think that they operate in sort of like a hive mind by being controlled by, say, the taller being?
I do. The taller being that I saw, he was in charge of things. He ran the show. And there's this disparity in intellect. We've been domesticating dogs and trying to communicate with dolphins for centuries, and we still, as of yet, can't sit down and have a conversation with one. But I can pet my dog, and I look in my dog's eyes, and reflected back, I get trust and love, and he knows I'm the alpha. He knows I'm in charge, and that's the way it was with this guy. Except I was the dog, because he sure was the alpha, and that's the best way I can explain it. I was the dog in the equation.
Let me ask this of you, Terry, because I did want to have enough time for people to ask questions, and yet I still have more for you to tell. Would you mind staying longer if we need to? Can we?
Absolutely.
Okay, great, great. All right, and that when it's time for questions, I'll tell people who wrote the questions to copy and repaste them at the bottom. Now, before we talk about the other stories from, or pick some of the handful of the ones that were the most harrowing that of the people that wrote to you, which you could explain how you got those at the end. What's the most terrifying experience that you had through all the abductions? I mean, was it this one particular one that really set you off to be as terrified as you were, or was there something that happened after?
The 1977 event was by far the most epic and the most frightening event. But I later on I would come to find out that these brief interludes that I had with where I saw UFOs at age 8 and age 11, I was taken, and I also believe that I was taken as a child, and and I have some memories that came back in that regard where I was part of a bunch of kids. There were like 7 of us, and they were always the same little kids when I was about 6. And we were in this white dome building with a window that slid. And there was a woman there. And in our neighborhood, there was an Asian lady that all of the local kids called Sue. And very kind, very nice lady. But inside this, when they took me as a child, there was a very kind, I believe, either alien or not clone, but hybrid woman. Petite, black hair, had an appearance of being almost Asian, but a bulbous back to her head. And she would play with us when we were little kids. And once, she slid a panel open on the side of the room that we were in, and we saw 1 trillion stars.
Wow.
And it was a reward. We did something. We were putting together these geometric forms for her as like this little exercise or something. And this panel slid back, and I saw the most beautiful, I mean, it was 1 trillion stars. And I remember thinking that this must be a planetarium, even as a little kid, I don't think I'm looking at space because the stars aren't twinkling. The stars are steady. And years later, I found out that in space, the stars don't twinkle because they're not filtered through an atmosphere. So wherever I was, when I was in that room, we were outside of Earth's atmosphere.
So you knew they'd taken you out of this planet.
Absolutely.
Wow, I
No
can't
problem.
even imagine. What gave you that perception? The stars?
The stars. That, and I had a second abduction in 1987. In 1987, I was taking a motorcycle ride, and on this motorcycle ride, I used to ride just for pleasure by myself in the fall, in the autumn, and I was real picky about my bike. I wouldn't ride on gravel. I rode on blacktop, and I rode the country roads, usually early of a Sunday morning for a couple hours, get back home, make breakfast for my family. And that was a September, October, maybe early November drill that we did every year that I rode bikes. And this one October day, I'm out on my motorcycle. The year is 1987, and I'm riding, and my wife had an experience too in 1987 that dovetails into this, her one and only experience. But I find myself, I'm driving, and it used to be a way to clear my head. I'm thinking about work, I'm thinking about whatever, and I'm just cruising and just enjoying the experience because I love motorbikes. And I suddenly realized, what the hell? I'm on gravel. I'm on a gravel road, and I'd never take my bike on gravel. It chips the paint. It's easy to lose control. So I'm like, what the hell? And I think, boy, man, I must be really absent-minded. And I stopped the bike, and I turned around, and I drove back to Blacktop. And then when I got home, I found out that I was 2 hours late. My wife was having
Missing time, huh?
missing time, 2 hours of missing time. My wife was just thought that I was sure that I was in a ditch somewhere. And 2 hours of missing time, and I had no clue. Years later, I had an interaction with a being, and I was allowed to have that memory. And in that memory, I was on board this, what looked like a warehouse, and it had that giant window thing going on, but this was, 100 times bigger. It was a gigantic thing. And I'm with this woman, Sue, but now I'm not a kid anymore. Now I'm an adult. And I'm with her, and we're talking with our minds like we did when I was a child and they used to take me.
Telepathically, yeah.
And I recall that we're looking out the window, and from the right side came this big sliver of white light, and it was the moon. And it scared the hell out of me. And she knew I was afraid, and she said, no. We're moving. The moon isn't moving. It's not going to hit us. We're moving. And this craft, I was on a craft, and it went and turned over and faced the moon, and we were on the dark side. So now I'm looking out this window, and I'm looking down. Of course, I'm still oriented where I'm standing up, but the ship is turned, and somehow gravity makes the same on the inside. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's not all over.
If it's enveloped in gravity, yes, you're obviously, stable no matter which position the craft is in.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm looking down, and I see specks of light. And the specks of light became more numerous. And then, honest to God, it was like LAX. There was, on the dark side of the moon, I saw a huge complex. And this would have been 1987. And I'm telling you, it was like LAX at night. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, my God, this is incredible, but something's wrong. This isn't right. Something doesn't look right. And then it occurred to me, there's no, you'll appreciate this. It's like there was no zoning. It was just these hodgepodge of buildings with no roadways, no street lights. It was just a collection of indiscriminately scattered buildings. One that I noticed was mushroom shaped. One was like a pinnacle. And they had windows with lights inside of them. And it was just this massive complex of some kind. And that's the extent of the memory that I had. And I don't think that was a dream or confabulation or hallucination. That happened. That's reality.
It's crazy because you're able to corroborate what so many people talk about on the dark side or the far side of the moon. That people claim that there are in fact bases. They are stationed there, whether to have easier access to us, whether they're there just to observe us, or whether the moon is a giant spaceship. There's all types of different you could say theories or ideas of what the moon actually represents, but one thing consistent is that it is owned by the ETs. As a matter of fact, even though Edgar Mitchell never would admit this to me on any level or not, on air or off air, which he did tell me a lot of stuff off air, he never was able to, he always deflected on the question of whether the Apollo astronauts were told not to return to the moon, which is why 50 years is gone since we had Apollo 11, and then we're, 72, 73 when the last Apollo mission to the moon happened?
72, yes.
Yes, that's literally coming a short time from now.
The next Apollo mission was sitting there ready to go. They were 4 or 5 months from blastoff, and they scrapped it.
Wow.
Why would that be? Yeah.
Now, real quick, okay, as I tell people, everyone who has questions, copy and repaste them at the bottom. I'm going to get one more question out of you, unless you feel there's something else necessary you want to tell people before we get what they wanted to ask you. From the 1,100 people that wrote to you in the back of your book, and you might as well tell people how that happened. What was the, I don't want to say craziest, but most terrifying story that someone told you that they experienced?
The greatest story that I've received, and I've read, I put my email address in the back of the book, and I say, I'm not a therapist or a doctor. I'm not even a ufologist. I'm just a guy that had an experience. If you had an experience and want to share it, I'll talk to you. And I get up every morning and I answer somebody's email every morning. It hasn't failed. It hasn't been a day gone by since I published the book that I haven't had email. And I've had some incredible stories, but the best by far came in about 2 months ago. And it was from a surgical nurse, and I won't mention the state. And she told me that when she was age 9, she had a sister age 7. And they played on their grandfather's farm in rural Kentucky. And the farm was set up where there was a farmhouse and a kind of a rail fence around the place, wood rail fence, and there was a berm, a mound of dirt about 6 foot high that separated the front yard from the pasture in back, where there was a pond. And the girls knew they could play anywhere they wanted in the front yard so long as they didn't cross that berm, because they were worried about the girls obviously drowning or something. So this woman claims that she and her sister again, she was 9, the elder, and her sister was 7. They were playing in the front yard, and they heard what she called calliope music. And a calliope, for those who may not know, is circus music. It's a circus organ, and it's that music that they play at a circus. And the girls thought, "Oh boy, a circus!" And they were conflicted. Well, we can't go over the berm, and they were like, "Well, let's just go see." So they climbed over the top of this berm and down a little bit, and these are her words exactly. And I reread this today because I wanted to make sure that I got it right. She said that they saw a carousel, only it was 5 times bigger than any carousel they'd ever seen. The horses were alive, and this thing was rotating super, super fast, and it was covered by a million lights. And they laid down on the grass, and they're watching this thing, and they're listening to this hypnotic carousel music, calliope music, and that's the last thing they remembered. The next thing they knew, it's 4 hours later, they wake up holding hands on the grass, and adults are running after them, screaming. You know, they were laying in an area in plain sight that had been searched dozens of times, and they just plop were there. And they were gone for 4 hours, and they were dredging the pond. They had poles and were, dredging the pond. And the police were there, and they dragged the girls home. And the curious thing was, they wouldn't talk about what happened to them. And not only that, but these 2 little girls that were really close to one another would not discuss it between them, between the 2 of them. Now, they were as close as sisters can be, and they both had children, had families, and stayed in contact, and were close, and, like all families, got together on the holidays and respected each other's birthdays, but they never spoke about what happened at Grandpa's. And the younger woman developed breast cancer, and this was 5 years ago, she was on her deathbed, and her older sister's holding her hand, and she says, "Do you want to talk about what happened at Grandpa's?" And she said, "Absolutely not." Absolutely
Even on her
not.
deathbed, huh?
And she died the next day.
Jeez.
Would not discuss it. My own sister. I wrote my book. My sister refused to read it, and my sister refused to talk about it. And then she called me up out of the blue one day, and she says, "Okay, this is all I want to say. I really feel bad that when the lights came into the house and you weren't in bed, that we weren't there to help you. I wasn't there to help you. But that's all." And she doesn't want to revisit the topic at all. And I understand that's common. I get that from people who write me letters. I bet I've got 600 letters from people saying, as a family, we saw this amazing thing, but we never discussed it. We never debriefed it. We never talked about it. We never spoke about it. And again, goes back to, they can control our thoughts. They can control our minds, our intentions.
Our bodies,
okay.
Like you said.
Bodies, yeah. But I think that, to me, was the most incredible story that I'd ever heard of all the ones I've read.
Now, I'm going to get to some questions, and as I do, everybody who has written questions in the past throughout the show, please copy and repaste them, and please put them in caps. I'm not necessarily reading them out of order, just what I could see in front of me. So the first one that I saved back here, which is fairly recent, let me see if I can get it in the way, is from LM. Have any of Terry's family members had encounters that he knows of?
I suspect my sister has, just based on that conversation I just told you about. Now, my dad had a strange fascination with the night sky, and he had a fascination with UFOs. But when I brought up the topic, he's like, "Oh, that's a bunch of bullshit. That's all Russian propaganda. That's none of that's real." But I think he had some experiences. I really do. I think it's a familial thing. I really do. You know, I got
Hmm.
two
That's why I
children.
was at. That's why I asked you even before we came on air.
Yvonne
Because
Smith just wrote a book about the familial connection among the connection among family members with ET, and it's common. It really is. It's common. They follow bloodlines, and I don't know why that is. You know, people ask me that all the time. Well, why were you taken? Well, hell, I don't know. I don't have the slightest idea. It's certainly not a privilege. Um, but you know, I wonder if maybe they've been taking my family for 100 years or 1,000 years. Who the hell knows? It's a mystery.
yeah, and you know what? I think that is the case, and that would make perfect sense. Especially if they live longer lives than ours, and if they have you know, I think you know this, that if gravity is what they use to control their craft, gravity affects the space-time continuum. Therefore, by definition, I see this a lot. They have the ability to time travel, so they could almost skip dimensions or times easily, I would think so. And therefore, what better way to follow their creation, if that's what we are, than to study the lines of the families that go back, 500, 1,000 years, maybe even 10,000 years, who knows
Yeah,
how long. But somewhere down the past, one of your father on your mother's side, their great, 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 great grandparents could have been the first that started this.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
here's another one for you. This is again, I'm going as far back as I can go. This is from Lasha Senyuk. Is it possible it was not someplace physical, but only in his mind? I don't know if she's referring to that. Maybe when you were on the dark side of the moon? Okay, I'll skip that. Let me go to something more recent here. The lion. Can he remember details about the creature's insignia? He said it was orange. Was it a yellowy orange or a reddish orange?
It was an orange, and I don't mean that to be flip, but I mean it was the color of an orange, like the kind like you buy in the grocery store. That's the orange color that it was. That's how I would describe it.
This next question is the same thing. Oh, about the symbol, what the symbol looked like. Can you remember what the symbol looked like?
I can't recall. There was a round patch on the shoulders, but I couldn't
Ooh.
see the emblem. However, on the side of the wall, etched into the stainless steel, there was a drawing of a plant, and it was a fractal design, like a tree with branches. And I don't think it was there strictly for ornamentation. I think it was there. It had some meaning, but it was definitely a fractal pattern where you had a central branch and then branches going out from that. Um, and in my mind's eye, I want to remember maybe a leaf here or there, but it was it was the plant stem itself with that fractal design that stood out. That was etched into that stainless steel or whatever steel they used to make this thing. That's the closest thing I can remember to any type of symbol.
Kevin Shoebridge, has he had any recent abduction experiences?
I have had some crazy experiences involving not abduction, and this sounds so cliche, but I've got a thumb drive put together. And this, again, sounds like another cliche. You've heard it 100 times. After I published my book, I published my book because I went in, I had an x-ray of my leg, and they found a computer chip, what looks like a computer chip, above my right knee. This was in 2012.
Ooh. Oh.
If
That.
you look in my book, There's a copy. I have the original x-rays. There is what looks just like a computer chip with 2 wires attached, and it's underneath my right knee and lateral. And the radiologist came down and looked at my leg because he insisted that there had to be a scar. And I said, "Doctor, I don't have a scar on my knee." And he says, "Well, you have to have, because you can't end up with something like this in your fascia, in your tissue underneath your skin without there being, you break the integrity of that skin, there's going to be a scar."
Well, that's what happens with any foreign object entering our body. Our body's going to reject it and create some sort of scar. And yet, it seems like a lot of these implants, if not all of them, when they're placed inside humans, they create no scar and leave nothing behind.
They left no scar. But I'll tell you what's crazy is that I was a runner. When I got out of the Air Force in 1979, I started running just to control my weight. And I kind of liked the dopamines, and it was good to stay in shape. And I noticed that every time I'd hit the 2-mile mark in my run, there was a spot on my right knee that would go numb.
Wow.
And I mean, it would go numb like a shot of Novocaine. And I could take a pin and I could delineate the margins of this thing. It was about, as a matter of fact, it was exactly the size. I lived in Michigan at the time. It was exactly the size of a Canadian toonie. You could place a Canadian toonie over it, and it was exactly that size. And I could, that spot would go completely numb at the 2-mile mark in my run, and it would stay numb for about a half an hour, 40 minutes. That's the spot where they found the computer chip.
You actually answered Lasha Senyak's other question that she wrote earlier. Have you been checked for implants before? It sounds like it. The only thing that I haven't seen is about wires regarding it. Have you ever had it removed? Or is it still there?
No. Well, that's a very interesting story. I had October, I need to tell this, and I'll tell it as quickly as I can because I know people have questions. I started putting my book together in 2016. In October, 3rd week in October 2017, I woke up in my living room, sitting bolt upright in my chair. And I opened my eyes, and seated directly across from me is a petite Asian woman wearing sunglasses, dressed all in black shoes with tall heels. Not spike heels, but tall, sturdy, like nursing shoes. Extra long sleeve covering these 4 long fingers. And she had this wig on top of her head, but it's kind of sideways. It's on askew because the back of her head is bulbous. It's not like a human head because she's not a human being. And I wake up and I have that sedated feeling again. I'm not freaked out. I'm not crazed. I'm not screaming. My first thought is, what the hell are you doing in my living room? And she shot back telepathically, I'm here about the thing in your leg.
Huh. Wow.
And I realized that we were communicating telepathically. And I got to tell you, there's a good reason why human beings cannot and should not communicate telepathically. And that is, we don't have the discipline to do so. Because I have a woman seated across from me, albeit not a human woman. And the thought crosses my mind, what if I say something to offend her? And it's kind of like when you were in 4th grade, the teacher says, don't think of elephants. Every 4th grader in the world is going to think about nothing but elephants for the next 5 days, And I thought, what if I think about, what if an inappropriate thought crosses my mind? And I got to be honest with you, every imaginable inappropriate thought you can think of floods my mind. And she sensed that I was uncomfortable because she fired back at me telepathically and said, you can keep your thoughts private, Terry. Just try. Now, I don't know if she said that just to placate me or if that's true, but that's what happened. But she told me that her host, she referred to them as her host, I take that to be the aliens, did not want the thing in my leg to fall into the hands of terrestrial scientists. And she said that clearly. And we exchanged this telepathic little back and forth for a bit, and boom, and she's gone. And I say that to say how I lost the thing in my leg, and that was November 17th, just 3 weeks later. I wake up and I've got this horrible pain in the top of my leg. I mean, it's like somebody hit me with a baseball bat at the top of both of my legs. In my book, I show you the bruises that came up on the top of my leg some weeks later, a week later. And I told my wife, I said, they came last night and they got this damn thing out of my leg. I guarantee it. So I went out to get an x-ray. So I took photocopies of when they x-rayed my leg. I've got what looks like a computer chip above my knee and below my knee and my calf muscle.
So 3. Or is it
Yes.
just one large one? There were 3, right?
Well, no, there's one computer chip above my knee, and then below my knee, there's a collection of things about the size of Tic Tacs, and they're arranged in a floral pattern in my calf muscle. And that's what freaked out the radiologist, because the radiologist says bone tissue doesn't just sprout in the middle of a muscle. Now, those items are still in my lower leg. And I found a chiropractor on November 17th. And I showed him my copies of my x-rays, and he looked at my legs. And this guy had to be an abductee. He told me, he says, tell you what, I'll write you an order for an x-ray. I'll pay for the x-ray. I want to see it, so long as when you write your book, you don't use my name or the name of my clinic. So, and I have that x-ray. And sure enough, the computer chip is gone. The things below my leg, below my knee, in my knee, they're still there in the calf muscle. But the computer chip thing was gone. But what I didn't see was there were 2 little strands of wire left, still in my leg. And I thought, what the hell? And I'm talking to the chiropractor after the fact, because I didn't see him at first. And I said, Doc, let me ask you, why, if these things are, 100 rungs up the evolutionary ladder above us, why would they be so inept as to leave these 2 wires in my leg? And he says, well, I got 2 words for you. He says, nanotechnology. He says, what they did was they took out the 1977 model and gave you the 2017.
The newer one.
The newer one. I still have those 2 tiny microscopic wires in my leg. They're clearly visible on x-ray.
Dedgar Lane, and let me just say this. I was going to save the shout-outs for the people who gave the super chats till the end, but I'm going to say them now. First of all, I want to thank Dedgar Lane for your super chat. Also, we have Deborah Holmes, Rockstar, and Justin T from the Blue Crew. I want to thank you all for your super chats. Now let me ask her question. And where would it go? I just lost the damn thing. Here it is. She says, I might have missed it, but why haven't you removed the implants? You kind of explained that newer one, though.
Yeah. They removed the computer chip thing, but the wires and the Tic Tac things in my calf muscle, they're still there. And why didn't I get them removed? I'm glad she asked, because that needs an explanation. Because when I first found out I had these things in my leg, that was the first thing on my list. I want these things out of me today.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I went to surgeon. And the problem that I had was I had a heart attack in 2005.
So you were too high risk for that to be removed, I would think.
I did not get a cardiac clearance letter.
Yeah.
And in fact, a surgeon won't touch you without a cardiac clearance letter. Because the surgical procedure wasn't viewed as a necessity. It was viewed as a non-therapeutic procedure, almost like plastic surgery. So therefore, they wouldn't touch me.
I
I was
know what you mean. Not because I've had a heart attack. I was supposed to have measly surgery to fix a broken hand, and because I've had a coma, I'm too high risk for it. I've been denied time and time again, and I'm still struggling for that. So I can absolutely relate. And it just sucks that unless you're need to have some sort of surgery to stay alive, they're not going to do it.
they're not going to do it. As a matter of fact, I think that ET knew that I was contemplating going either to St. Luke's in the Philippines or to maybe a surgeon in Mexico to have them removed. Because I wanted them in my hand. I didn't want them in my leg. I wanted them in my damn hand. And I like I said, I just could not get it done medically.
Here is more for you. Do you believe in any other metaphysical phenomena?
I sure do. Um, I had this entity appear to me in my living room, and that wasn't a dream. That was not a dream. But after that, my intuition is like through the roof. And I didn't have that before. I got a handful of change the other day, and as soon as it touched my hand, I thought, I'll be damned, there's a wheat penny here. I looked in my change, and sure enough, there was a 1956 wheat penny. I've had things like, I know my phone's going to ring. You hear that all the time. I have this I would say that I have ESP that I didn't have before.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about that after being in contact with ETs, after close encounters of the fourth or fifth kind. There's this strange phenomena that happens afterwards. They call there's a word that's slipping my mind. High strangeness. High strangeness is what they talk about. Things like ghosts or shadow people around their homes, or the like you mentioned,
Oh,
the ability to have telepathy or telekinesis, or forethought of something happening, like a phone call.
and I have an unbelievable electronic failures. It's incredible the amount of electronic failures that I have.
Just by being
Uh,
around something?
yeah,
Wow.
electronic stuff breaks all the time. Breaks. I wear a mechanical watch. I can't wear a watch with a battery. It won't work.
That's why you
It
have to
won't work.
wear an old school mechanical wind-up clock, I would think.
I'm wearing a 1973 Rolex. It works just fine.
Ha! At least you got a Rolex, though. No, but what about your phones, though? I mean, like we were talking earlier, does that get interference for the same reason?
My phone. I got a buddy who works for Treasury, and he's high placed within government.
Mm-hmm.
And he calls me one day, and we're chatting, and he stops talking, and he says, "I'm going to call you back from my work phone." And he calls me back, and he says, "Your phone's tapped."
Huh!
I
Holy
said, "No."
shit! By
That's what I
who?
said. "Oh, shit." And he says, "Dude, I'm not going to call you." He said, "I'll call you on Sheila's. I'll call you on your wife's phone. I'm not talking on this line." Now, you've heard the phrase, you've heard about these black helicopters.
Uh-huh.
Everybody laughs. It's a joke. It ain't no joke. I've got 167 photographs of helicopters taken over my house. I've got photographs with no markings whatsoever.
Just pure black. Some of them even the new stealth helicopters even.
I'll send you some photographs if you'd like that will blow your mind.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to. I definitely would love to see them and use them for that matter. Um, let's see what else we have here. Uh, okay. Would you be willing to speak to a person who is claiming to be an EBE? And I think you know what EBE is, right?
I certainly do.
Yeah.
And I certainly would.
The lion, there you go. There's your answer. All right, let me see what else we got here. Now remember, folks, anybody who wrote questions at the very beginning, I can't go back that far, so please bring them back to the most recent. Okay, LM. Does Terry experience a lot of synchronicities in his day-to-day life? It's
Right?
ironic. We were just kind of talking about that almost.
Synchronicities all the time. Crazy, crazy ass coincidences you would not believe. Yeah, I do.
Let me see what else here. Oh, earlier Frankie Zomboy wanted to know the name of your book, which I told you at the end I would definitely plug it in, but might as well plug it in now too.
Oh, sure. It's Incident at Devil's Den, and it's only on Amazon. Incident at Devil's Den. It's in paperback. It's in a cheap Kindle version if you'd like to read it online. And it's also available on an audiobook. And I did the audiobook in my own voice because I was told to get a voice artist. And I said, no, I want it to be. I want it to be my words. So for better or worse, it's in my own words. But any of the above are out there on Amazon.
The Lion asks if we could pass info somehow. If you don't mind, Terry, I'll put you in touch with the Lion afterwards.
Sure.
Let's see. Anybody got something new here? I'm waiting for somebody else to write something new that I can ask. We already asked about the synchronicities. Well, in the meantime, until I find someone else to write something new, tell me one more of the 1100 stories, 1100 plus stories that people have written you that really shocks you to your core.
I got a great one. A couple from, and it's similar to the other story in a lot of ways. They went from Reno, Nevada to Las Vegas, and it's a drive that they made all the time. And they made it late at night. Evidently, they had relatives in Reno, and they lived in Vegas. And they made that drive across the desert. And one night, they're making the drive like 2 a.m. And they passed, now this is in March, they passed this giant Christmas store that they had never seen before with 1 million Christmas lights all over it. It's 2 a.m. and the place is lit up like crazy. And the inside of the store is lit up with this bright white light blowing out. And it's 2 a.m. And they drive by and they're like, huh, that's pretty strange. And they even thought about stopping for a moment, but they want to get home. But they thought, that's crazy. They must have built that since our last trip. And they got home and they're thinking, you know what, there was something crazy about that. Something wasn't right. And they decided to go back in the daytime. And they drove back and they never could find the place because it wasn't there. They also ended up losing 45 minutes that they swear they'd made that drive dozens of times. They swear they knew it to the minute. They lost 45 minutes. But the Christmas store on acid wasn't there anymore.
All right, here's another one for you. Have you ever felt the presence of them around you but not seen them?
Yeah, I have. Usually when I have a nightmare, and I'll tell you, it's almost an obsession. No, it is an obsession. It's an obsessive compulsive disorder type thing. I'll have that. Well, I'll have a nightmare. I'll wake up and I'll feel them close, and I got to turn on the light, which annoys my wife. And I got to grab my 45, and I got to grab my high power flashlight, and I got to go from room to room, and I got to go from closet to closet, and I got to check the alarms, and I got to check the locks on the doors. And once I'm done with that, then I can go back to sleep and sleep like a baby. If I don't, I'll lay there wide awake the rest of the night. But if I get up and I do that ritual, then I can go back to sleep. But yeah, I do feel their presence.
Because of the fear factor, right? That's why you're driving the 45.
Absolutely. And you know, I hate to say this, but if I found a gray in my room, I would blow him to hell. I really would, without a second thought.
Oh, you're not the only person. That's for sure. I've heard that multiple times. As a matter of fact, I think that's part of the reason why a lot of them don't hover so close to us in broad daylight, because out of the fear of just humanity in general, especially in America, where we have a lot more guns than, say, in Europe in private hands. What are we going to do? We're going to shoot at them. Try flying over South Central during the day. I guarantee you, you're going to have some
Yeah.
shots from Tech 9s, Uzis, AK-47s, SKSs, whatever it be. The point is people will be firing bullets at the craft and the beings.
You know what's crazy though? I told you about the woman that appeared in my living room. Um, in that interaction, I recognized her as being Sue from my childhood. This entity that appeared in my home in October of 2017
Mm-hmm.
was the same woman. The same woman. She hadn't aged a day. That was the same woman that took care of me when I was in that white domed room when I was 4 and 5 and 6 years old, playing with geometric figures on the floor. And there were always the same kids there. It was really crazy.
It was
And there
following their lives, obviously, right?
Yeah. But there was an exception. There was a girl there who was always there. And she was kind of Sue's helper. She was a little older than us. She was like 14 or something. And we were all little kids. But she would never interact with us. And we were all afraid of her. And she was dressed in 1940s attire. She had on this little short dress like they dressed up little girls in the 40s with, white socks and black buckle shoes and pigtails. And she looked like she was right out of a 1940s movie. But there was something odd about her, and all of us kids were afraid of her. We all kids spoke with each other telepathically, which I was real disappointed to find out I couldn't do that on Earth. But when we were playing, we could speak to one another with our minds, and it was crazy. It was cool. But this girl would never communicate with us, and I always wondered who she was or what her purpose was for being there.
You just read my mind. I was just going to say, do you think that she herself was an ET?
I do.
Especially since she wouldn't interact with you or any of the other children that you said. That's freaky.
Yeah, it was freaky. She was the ET in charge.
All right, let's see here. We got more. Okay. Does he have any indication that their plans are coming to a head?
I have. We were talking about intuition and feelings. I have a feeling something big is about to happen. And, people have been saying that for 100 years. People have been saying that for 2,000 years.
Longer. As a matter of fact, longer than that. Yeah. But only now, even Stanton Friedman, before he passed on, he said that the lifetime of his grandchildren, which are in their, late 30s, 40s, maybe even older, he said they live in the most exciting times because what's been happening for the last, say, 25, 30 years, right now, the amount of acceptance of everybody of intelligent life being out there. No one really, even the debunkers at this point, no longer say it's just gas and polars because we keep finding exoplanets. And not just exoplanets on a daily basis. We find Goldilocks planets on a daily basis. And that's just assuming that they live in the same temperature, in the same way we do. All right? That's just, if humans move to those Goldilocks planets, but that still limits the scope of what these different species may need to require to live on. And we also know from Earth, right? We have creatures at the bottom of this ocean that have no light whatsoever, and yet they're still alive.
They're living at 5,000 feet under the. Imagine the pressure of 5,000 feet.
I couldn't even imagine. It would crush a submarine.
And they live next to a thermal vent.
Yeah.
And the water's 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So, who's to say that they're not swimming in pools of methane? You know, that there's that entire civilizations. And you know what? There's all this talk about the Fermi paradox and why SETI hasn't found anything. Well, you know what? SETI makes no sense to me. And it
Silly
makes me,
effort to silly effort to what's the acronym that Stanton used to say? Silly effort to investigate SETI. The thing is, here's my problem, and I told this with Seth Shostak many times. I said we're using radio waves to communicate. Who's to say that that is so far primitive that they are also using radio waves? Why would they use something, for instance, like light or any
it's
other means?
ridiculous. It's ridiculous. SETI wasn't set up to find extraterrestrial life. It was not.
It-
SETI was set up by the government to give the public the illusion that we're doing something.
yeah.
Because you know what they want to do? They want to shift your focus from what's overhead to outer space. They want the public to be focused on exoplanets and SETI signals, you know, which are what? Analog signals in a digital age? Come on. You know,
Yeah.
we've been using radio for 120 years, and 50 years from now, nobody will use radio waves for anything.
You're absolutely
So,
right. I've actually heard someone say that the best way to communicate would be in light. And, you know, if you are sending information via light, not only is it traveling faster, but you have things, for instance, that could be uploaded. One person even suggested that the best way to communicate is to send our entire internet in light because it can be transferred that way. It will travel faster, and it'll be a giant dictionary of humanity, good and bad.
well, and you know, the problem that I have with that is that we are shouting into the darkness. You know, the universe is a very quiet place, and that may be for good reason. I mean, there may be civilizations out there that have learned a hard lesson we have yet to learn. So, you know, I'm not so certain that, you know, I Love Lucy has been traveling now for 70 years
Hmm.
across the galaxy. And, you know, I'm not sure there aren't, who's to say there aren't bands of unethical, marauding people out there just looking for planets to use us for food and raw material. And, you know, just because we are at heart, we want to think that we're ethical and good human beings, you know, but we're a warlike species, you know. Why would we expect ET to be, just because they're evolved intellectually, does not mean that they're evolved ethically. The two don't go together. They didn't go together for the Nazis, you know. They were advanced scientifically, but ethically, they were way down on the bottom of the scale. So I think we've placed our planet in danger, and it's too late, you know. Cat's out of the bag. So,
And it's been out of the bag.
yeah, yeah. And that may be what we're experiencing. You know, one day we may wake up and it be raining UFOs.
You know what? You know, you mentioned raining UFOs. The USS Nimitz, that's exactly what they described it as on the after 2 weeks of tracking them on radar from the USS Princeton. They said they were literally raining UFOs, over 100 of them, dropping from way over 80,000 feet, which is the, as you know from being in the Air Force, the highest our radar goes, and they would drop to about 50 feet above sea level in 0.57 seconds. Think about that.
Yeah.
Over
Yeah.
80,000 feet in 0.57 seconds. What is that, 28,000 miles per hour?
Yeah.
Humongous, velocity, and yet no sound, no sonic boom, nothing.
Yeah. And certainly no organic earthly creature could survive
Oh
that
God,
ride.
no! The inertia would kill us. Even mechanical, right? Let's just say if we took like one of our jets, even the inertia would destroy some of the panels in the craft itself.
Yeah. 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 I answered a question on Quora. I used to answer questions on Quora. And I came out, and when that story hit the New York Times, I wrote a Quora question about it and answered some of the questions. And I got barraged by people saying, Oh, it's a load of crap. Those are drones. Well, you know what? There's no drone on this planet that could take that type of punishment.
Oh God, no, no way.
But people have knee-jerk reaction, and thank God, I think we're getting past the giggle factor. We're not getting, it's not as big a joke as, the rectal implants and, anal probes, and
Oh
we're getting,
God,
we're
that
getting,
was Michael Shermer's and Philip Glass's biggest joke to everybody. Show me the anal probes, and they would have that laugh about it. The thing is, though, is like I said earlier, you ask anybody who's in high school or college, they believe that not only ETs are here, most of them believe we've been visited. And then you go to the adults who live through those ridicule years, like you and I, and you're older than me, we still had that ridicule factor. 35 years ago, I was a nutcase just for talking about this, even though I'd only seen something in the sky. I never had face-to-face interaction with the ETs, never been abducted, never close encounters of the third, fourth, or fifth kind, or even second kind for that matter. Yet
yeah,
it was considered purely fringe, weather balloon this, swamp gas that, natural
yeah,
phenomenon, bullshit answers all the way across the board. Really bothered
yeah,
the hell out of me. But you know what? Like you said, we're really past that. Look at all the cable networks and how much money they're pouring into TV shows about these. I had Kevin Burns on and Giorgio Tsoukalos. Kevin Burns being the creator of Ancient Aliens. They're on the
right, right,
11th season. Either right now they're filming it or finishing it, or I think they are just wrapped it up. I don't know if they aired the 10th. The point is they're on for 11th seasons right now, and there's no end coming soon. And what I got him to tell me afterwards that this seems to be and will go down for the in the history of the History Channel, the highest rated, highest grossing production ever in history. And the
I believe
costs are
that.
very low for what they do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And the interest is so, so incredibly high. It's not just about talking about, uh, Eric Chariots of the Gods, Eric Von Donick and stuff. It talks about everything, including Battle of L.A. to modern abductions to, some of the more famous cases that even happened, say, 50 years ago.
yeah,
There used to be a link. I don't know where it's on my website anymore. It was from a British medical journal, 1895, and it showed two grays. So those skeptics, when I hate to use the word skeptics as much as debunkers because it's good to be skeptical, but it's to be a debunker is a whole different level. And how can they say that we got the idea of big-headed, almond-sized eyes, bald-headed, skinny, short grays from TV if the fucking things were on, British medical journals in 1895 or in
yeah.
cave drawings 2,000 years ago? It makes no sense.
Makes no sense. Makes no sense. But that's what that knee-jerk reaction. People were just conditioned, and I wonder how much ET may have had to do with that. But I'll tell you what, I think and I may be wrong, and I may be just way off base, but I think that our government is acting in concert with with the entertainment industry to do not a soft disclosure, but to condition us to the idea.
Well, it's funny you mentioned soft disclosure because I think it's a little bit about both. Sure, they're acclimating us, right, to the idea of them. At the same time, I think there is sort of soft disclosure going on. We had the three DoD films released by DoD in 2017, December 2017, I believe it was. And even though the Nimitz incident happened in 2004, it took that long to get it out there. But uh, another thing, I'm sure you've read Colonel Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. You know about it at least, right?
I read it. Yes, I did.
So I think another thing that they're waiting for us to do is first bombard us with the information to get us used to seeing these non-terrestrial vehicles and non-terrestrial beings that are more advanced than us and yet, look very different than us. They might be waiting for us to catch up on our technology side when our material sciences get up there, because Philip Corso claimed that a lot of the technologies we're using now were seeded into the hands through him. And when he brought these objects to companies like Bell Labs or
Right, yeah.
IBM, he said they were from the foreign technology division. He didn't say what foreign technology. They assumed it was Soviet. No one ever asked, "Is this from off the world?" And it was a purely what a great cover. Is part of me is laughing on the inside when I was reading that, honestly, and it's really sad I never had a chance to talk to him because he did die within 6 months of the publishing of the book.
Which is suspect.
Very, very.
Excited.
Okay, more for you. What
Yes.
is the root of the fear? Is it created by them? That's from Frankie Zomboy.
I think the root of the fear is in our brainstem, and I think it goes back eons. I think it's embedded in our brains the way the fear of fire, the fear of, we got a fear of the dark. We don't have to worry about being eaten now. Well, supposedly, but that fear, that's back from when we sat around a campfire at night, waiting those long nights out to see if, something was going to jump out and grab us and eat us. That's in the lower part of our brainstem. I think that's where that fear comes from, because it's the same fear. Whether you're sitting in the dark afraid of the saber-tooth about to come out of the shadows and kill you, or you're waiting for E.T. to come out of the shadows and grab you and take you aboard a spaceship and maybe bring you home. But that fear that's a genuine fear. You know what? Look at David Paulides' books. Look at the number of people that have gone missing from state and national forests and parks. And you know what? I was taken from a national park. So, thousands of people go missing
and
from
never return. That's the scariest part with David's books and his stories. And he still operates the missing 411 hotline. I don't think it's a hotline. I think it's an email now. His numbers are private, but for the point being, is missing411.com is still the place where you report where missing people have gone, and they literally disappear. Like, there's no way they could disappear. Say two parents are walking with their child, and the child is, say, 5 feet behind them, and there's nothing else, nowhere around them, no trees, no creeks, nothing. They look behind, the footsteps ended about, a few seconds before them and just gone. Almost like they're plucked from the sky and just gone.
I was taken from Devil's Den State Park. I researched Devil's Den State Park when I wrote my book. In 1947, there was a 7-year-old girl named Catherine Van Alst who was running around the camper with her brothers. Brothers came around. Mom's sitting there putting breakfast on the picnic table. Brothers came around. Catherine didn't. Mom's like, "Boys, where's your sister?" "Well, she's right here." "No, where'd she go?" Massive manhunt. Well, massive hunt for this missing little 7-year-old girl in her swimsuit and flip-flops. Massive search, 2,500 acres, thousands of volunteers searched the place over and over and over again. The last day of the search, the 7th day, they were going to call it off on the 8th day. The 7th day, a young man volunteer from the University of Arkansas named Chadwick found her, called her name, and she stepped out of a cave at an elevation of 700 feet and like 8 miles she would have to walk 8 miles. She stepped out of this little cave and said, "Here I am." She was well hydrated. Hadn't lost an ounce, and other than a few bug bites, was in perfect health, but could not say what happened to her, where she'd been for those 7 years. And I went through a great deal of trouble trying to track down
Wait, years or
Catholic.
days, you mean?
Pardon me?
Did
She
you
was
say
gone 7 days. 7
days?
days.
Yeah.
I misspoke. 7 days she was missing. And then, that just, when I was writing my book, young man from Bartlesville, Oklahoma, 32 years old, in Devil's Den on the Butterfield Trail, not far from where we were camped, sits down and asks his buddy, hey, would you go back to the truck and get my asthma medication? So the guy says, sure, I'll be right back. Parked less than a quarter mile away. He runs it, picks up the kid's medication, or the man's medication, he's 32, runs back, his buddy's gone. Rodney Letterman was his name.
Jesus.
He's gone. All that's left is his cell phone. They bring in search dogs. Dogs get a scent from the phone, and they sit down.
Because that was the last place he was. Gone after that.
So that's what he was gone. Then, and they didn't find him. That was in August of 2017. They found him.
Jeez.
March 29th, 2019. They found his skull cap sitting on a log in plain view in an area that had been searched dozens of times.
Oh,
So-
shit. Really?
Really?
So it's almost as something was placed back after to show that he's not alive anymore, but we're going to give you some sort of closure, in essence?
I don't know what the intent is, but if you read Paulides' books, happens all the time.
Oh, yeah. I have two of them, and he was scheduled to be on, but we had to reschedule, so he's going to come back. We'll set that up, but yeah, they're freaky, those cases. He has a movie, and he's working on part 2, as a matter of fact. And in the movie, the first one, there's only one case that I know of where someone was found. And they showed that this child, who was 2 years old at the time, where he had traveled, if you'd seen the documentary.
I did.
You remember at the very end, the guy who was in his 60s, and people said that people still go up to him and say, hey, you were missing, we're looking for you, and they said there was no way even a human could get the distance he did, an adult human, with the terrain they had, let alone someone that's that small.
Yeah, there was like 2 feet of snow on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Across barbed wire fences.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Amazing.
9 lives. Do you think they have good intentions?
No, I do not. And you know what? I think that there's a medical doctor. I won't use Dr. Greer's name, but there's a medical doctor who kind of espouses that that maybe they're benevolent. Maybe they have good intentions for mankind's evolution. And my question for any doctor would be, if these beings had any regard for humanity, 300 years, and they've been here for thousands of years, 300 years ago, why couldn't they pulled aside some medicine man, medical person, some academic, and said, hey guys, wash your hands before surgery, and you'll save 7 out of 10 patients instead of losing 7 out of 10.
Yeah,
but they
the
didn't
way
do that.
People died in Civil War.
They didn't do that.
Yeah.
But they do give us stuff we can weaponize.
And that's the scary part, where we have the human psyche, because before we think about saving our lives, we're thinking, how can we weaponize the technology? And that's very scary.
Well, that's why I think they're not benevolent. Like I said, they'd have told us to wash our hands. They'd have done. Look at all the benevolent things they could do for us. But they're going to give us radar range or microwaves. Come on, that makes no sense. I don't see anything that makes me think they're benevolent. I don't. I think they may have this attitude that, like I said earlier, hey, just doing my job, man. But that certainly doesn't mean that they're kind to us or have good intentions for us, because I don't think they do.
Kind of like the way we look at, say, another species on this planet, like ants, right? We're doing our job, or rats, right? Or mice that we're testing on. We have a job to do. We're growing human ears on them. We're, testing cocaine on them, things like that. But we don't really regard them as their emotions and their safety and things like that because we're so superior to them.
But that bugs the hell out of me because animals feel fear, feel pain. I mean, I don't eat meat not because of religious reasons, but just out of empathy for animals. And a lot of people scoff at that and laugh, and I know that there's a big industry in poultry and
Hmm.
beef and pork, and I'm not trying to cost anybody their jobs, but I'm just saying that maybe we as a human race ought to think about the species that are a level below us, as much as we worried about species that are a level above us.
It's true, very true. And you're right, those are huge industries. So is big pharma, very, very huge, and that could be all washed away if they just gave us the technology. And that was one thing Richard Doty was able to say, was that he could answer any questions that the AFOSI, Office of Special Investigations. He said he could talk about ETs, but he cannot talk about technology, specifically medical technology. Anything that can help us live longer, be more immune to things. Nope, because it's going to cost money to the big companies that make billions a year. Billions. The top big pharma companies, the top 10 last year alone made $64 billion. I mean, that's a staggering amount of money. Huge, huge. And I think the figure was just in the United States, if I'm not mistaken, let alone around the world.
My wife is an insulin-dependent diabetic,
Oh, God,
and
she's got to pay 500 times what she used to, say, 30
you
years
know,
ago.
well, no, 2 years ago, 2 years ago, we paid $40 a month for her insulin. Now we're paying about $250 a month. I asked the pharmacist. I said, "What do people do that can't afford this?" She said, "They go without."
Yeah, and they
And I said,
die. And they die.
Yeah, they die. That's exactly right.
That's
Something's wrong about
insane.
that. That's just not right. Not in this country.
Let me see what else I have here for you, because I know I've kept you probably, yeah, it's getting to an hour after. I know we have more here. Let me find them. A lot of great comments, just so you know. All right. I'm looking for questions here. These are questions between each other. Um, I'm just going through them. Okay, Lasha Senyak. If Terry could ask them one question and get a true answer, what would he ask?
It's gotta be. It's gotta be the elephant in the room. What are your intentions for us?
Well
Gotta be.
said. Well said. The agenda, right? Isn't that what it always comes down to? What the hell are you using us for? Why? What do you want from us?
Right.
Are we your alien ant farm? Are we your little test?
Yeah, I could see that. I sure could. I could see that.
Here's another one for you. What do you think of Lloyd Pye and the extension of the Star Child skull and crystal skulls?
I gotta tell you, I I wish I I'm sorry. I wish I knew. I know that those crystal skulls supposedly can't be reproduced today with our technology, and that means that it was made with somebody else's technology. Either that, or maybe we as a species were more evolved. I don't know, sometime in the past. I don't know, but I don't know. It baffles me. It just absolutely baffles me. The crystal skulls. What was the other one you asked me about?
About Lloyd Pye and let me go back to it. Him in general and the Star Child slash crystal
Oh, is
skulls.
that tiny being, the tiny little embryonic looking thing that came up missing?
The tiny being you're talking about, the 11-inch tall one that was in Greer's movie? I don't think so. That's not.
I'm not
I don't think
sure.
that's
I'm sorry. I'm
related
not
to
familiar.
Lloyd Pye.
I'm not familiar with Lloyd Pye. I'm sorry.
I know he had possession of one of the skulls. Other than that, I don't know much more about him either, so I can't elaborate. Maybe whoever asked that can elaborate that. I know there's a little bit of a delay, so we'll find out. Let me see. I do see another one here. Another question for you. Let me get down to it. And this is the last one unless I find someone else to grab something in. So anybody out there listening, if you have any final questions, please bring it in because I don't see any more. This is from Pam Rettenberg, who's also my social media manager. And her website for everybody out there is UnitedTruthSeekers.com. Okay, her question is, has he ever talked to an alien and does he know their language?
I spoke to the alien that was in my living room, and that was a telepathic communication in English with impeccable grammar, without accent, um, and that's my only communication. Um, to sit down and have a voice conversation, I never have because I don't. I think they've lost the ability to communicate in that way. I think they. I think they communicate telepathically because that's all they have left. They may not have vocal cords left after eons of evolution.
Emotions too is what I gather. They don't have the emotions that we have. A lot of
No,
people would mention.
I would agree with that. Specifically, empathy.
Yes, yes. And if there was empathy, we wouldn't be taken and had so much fear as we do.
Yeah.
Okay, this one is about the Star Child. The skull. Here's more. Is from the Lion. The Star Child skull was the supposedly alien skull found in the southwest of the USA. It has several biological anomalies. That's what the expansion of the Lloyd Pies skull, crystal skull. I believe it was crystal. That's all it
Yeah.
says, though.
Yeah. It's a mystery.
Okay.
It's just this.
Uh, do you have any more to add to it?
I don't. I don't. I wish I did. I wish I did because I would. But anything I'd say would be speculation.
It's true. I mean, that's all we can do. It's not like I could, book an ET for tomorrow and say, "Hey, I need you for 2 hours." I always say that. It would be great, wouldn't it? Literally
Yeah.
to put, interrogate one and say, "Hey, tell me all of the answers that we have, everything that we speculate on." It would be nice if we could have confirmed fact. And one thing I also noticed that in the history of these ETs, they seem to lie to us. With the times. 150 years ago, they were from a different part of this planet. 80 years ago, they were from another planet in our solar system. 30 years ago, they were from Zeta Reticula or another star system. Now they're possibly from another dimension or timeline or our future or all of the above.
And you know what I think? I think that they lie to us for their own reasons. And maybe we maybe 100 years ago we wouldn't be able to wrap our heads around an interdimensional being like we can today. Probably only a handful of physicists in the world would have been able to wrap their heads around that. From people from Mars, yeah, that would be commonly accepted and not accepted, but commonly considered as a possibility, remote as it could be. But, I mean, what's his name? We only discovered, we thought that the Milky Way galaxy was the entire universe until what, 1929?
Well,
When
26 when we discovered other galaxies. That's right. Yeah.
Edwin Hubble, yeah. So, I think their stories to us probably match our level of understanding. Maybe in their minds it's not a lie. Maybe in their minds it's their way of speaking to us like children.
True. Very true. Very, very good way to put it. And you know what? In some ways, we are. We are very immature with the technology we use, the way we interact with each other, the way we kill indiscriminately, other things like that. I would think so. That's a huge factor. Okay, here's one more for you. 9 lives. What do you think happens to our souls when we die?
You know, I spent an hour last night on my radio show on artistfirst.com talking to Bruce Leininger. And Bruce Leininger's son, James Leininger, is the young man who is the subject of the book Soul Survivor. And we talked about the subject of reincarnation and about the things that came out of this kid's mouth from age 2 to 4 blew me away. And it's all documented. I mean, and Dad's not a dope, you know. Dad's a Columbia-educated, intelligent man. He and his wife, and they were fundamentalist Christians, or at least devout Christians. And this was totally contrary to their belief system. And they were left with no recourse but to believe when they were able to verify all these things that this kid was saying. He told his family I was shot down by the Japanese in a Corsair off of the carrier Nakoma. And the parents are like, Nakoma? That sounds like a Japanese name. And the kid's talking to them like he's an adult. He's 3.5. He says, no, stupid. You know, Nakoma's an Indian. That's an Indian tribe or something. He says that was the name of the carrier. Sure enough, they found the Nakoma, the carrier. They found the name that James Houston that he was in his past life. The names of his buddies that were killed, the buddies that he knew on the carrier. He met when he was age 7. They took him to a carrier reunion, and he sat with these two 85-year-old guys and said, Luke, you know, Joe, how you guys been? And they sat down, the three of them, these two old men and this young kid, and talked like a reunion of three old friends. Absolutely incredible.
Like almost his soul was reinserted into another born body.
Well, I'll tell you, it's the best argument for reincarnation I've ever heard.
And we know reincarnation is part of, I believe, Hindu religion, maybe even Buddhist, which goes back thousands of years.
Sure enough. Yeah.
Terry, we seem to be caught up with the questions. I don't see any more new ones lately. We've covered a lot of ground. I know there's still a lot more to talk about with your story, which I have to bring you back next time for sure. This has been awesome and definitely flew by very quickly. And now I want to give you a chance for a final statement for everybody. And of course, where to find you and your show.
Yes. First, if you can, read my book. I've got photographs. I've got the X-rays. I've got an incredible amount of information in it. It's called Incident at Devil's Den. It's on Amazon. And buy it, read it, look at the evidence. And my thought, my parting shot, I guess, is be open-minded. You know, let's move forward. Let's strive for higher consciousness.
And you know, that's what I always say to everybody. Please keep an open mind. Keep your eyes to the sky. And remember, disclosure is in everybody's hands. Please be proactive. Don't just be a passive listener or passive researcher. Share the information. Share this interview. Share anything you have. Photographs, videos. If you have your own story, if you've been taken, if you have ever had contact, now's the time to come forward. You're not going to face the ridicule you would have faced 40, 50 years ago, especially not here, not in this forum. This is why I think we are living in some of the most exciting times. It's not going to be long before we are finally walking down the street and seeing ETs walking on the same street. Whether that's the case or not, but you know, theoretically, whatever you want to call it, the point is it's not going to be that long that I think we will not only catch up as far as material sciences, but with us and them being able to coexist. And I think at one point, once we start to have them openly, you're going to see them all around without them cloaking themselves, flying in and out of our airspace. I think some of the bases that people say is here on this planet will be revealed. So, with that being said, folks, everybody, thank you so much for joining on this show. I want to thank my super chatters again. We have Deborah Holmes, Dedgar Lane, and of course from the Blue Crew, Rockstar and Justin T. And thank you all from the Blue Crew as well, as I mentioned. Also, remember Pam Brettenberg. Check out our website, UnitedTruthSeekers.com. And also, everything that you are looking for with regards to the show is the name of it, folks. Dr. J Radio Live. That is DRJ Radio Live. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, whatever you could think of. Minds, as you know, YouTube. It's all under the same word. DRJ Radio Live. With that being said, folks, this is Dr. J along with the one and only Terry Lovelace. And we are officially signing off.